Mutet you. Gua nggak bisa nih. Udah. Bonjour Peter, ça va?
Ça va très bien, je suis là.
Oh yeah, pas de problème maintenant.
It will come, I'm confident.
Today, I hope it's a fun day. Yesterday was quite an interesting time, as you know, as you heard. Hi, Ramesh.
Hi, Excellency. How are you?
Surviving, as usual.
Indeed.
Let me check with my people if we can start right now.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I think we have quite a full house today. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, distinguished delegates, as you know, I have to introduce myself. My name is Diandra Sajani. I'm the permanent representative of Indonesia to the UN. And of course, I'm very much honored to welcome all of you in this Arria Formula meeting with the topic cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. A most interesting title, I believe. I wish to express my appreciation to my dear friends, colleagues from Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the ICRC for co-hosting with us in this meeting. Now, the objective of our discussion of this afternoon would be first to raise awareness of the vulnerability of critical infrastructures against cyber attacks, including the potential humanitarian consequences of such an attack. Secondly, to discuss the need to protect critical infrastructures against cyber attacks and ways to strengthen these efforts globally. And third, to discuss how international laws and norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace protect critical infrastructure and contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security. Now, allow me, first of all, on behalf of all the co-hosts, to thank all the briefers who will be sharing their valuable expertise on the issues. I believe everybody knows Mr. Peter Maurer, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, who has been generous enough to give his time for us. And of course, Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, the acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator in the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or UNOCHA. And last but not least, Ms. Renata Dwan, the Director of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, or UNIDIR. I think we have excellent briefers that will certainly provide us with lots of food for thought. Now, without further ado, and to go straight to the point, I would like to invite our first briefer, Ramesh from the UNOCHA. He will be speaking on the contemporary challenges in the protection of civilians and humanitarian aspects related to cyber attacks, as well as the stability of the ICT environment in ensuring timely humanitarian responses. Mr. Rajasingham, the floor is yours. Or I would say the mic is yours. We don't have any floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, colleagues, also to the co-hosts. Thank you very much indeed for inviting OCHA to deliver these opening remarks on the protection of civilians as it relates to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. As Secretary Guterres has noted in his most recent report on the protection of civilians, many armed conflicts continue to be characterized by civilian death, injury, trauma, forced displacement, as well as damaged and destroyed homes, schools, markets, places of worship, hospitals, and other essential civilian infrastructure, such as electrical and water systems. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic, which the Secretary General has called the greatest test that the world has faced since the establishment of the United Nations, compounds this human suffering substantially. The pandemic has the potential to devastate conflict-affected countries and overwhelm healthcare systems, many of which were already weak. In places like Yemen, Afghanistan, and Libya, we have seen the extent to which the ability to prevent the spread of the virus, care for infected people, and sustain essential health services for the general population has been severely constrained. Moreover, as the toll of armed conflict and the pandemic compound each other to overwhelm healthcare systems in armed conflicts around many parts of the world, attacks on healthcare continue. Since the beginning of the year, the World Health Organization has recorded more than 135 attacks against healthcare in 13 countries, many of which are facing armed conflict, obviously. Last week, and thanks to Mr. Mara, the ICRC reported more than 600 incidents of violence, harassment, or stigmatization against healthcare workers, patients, and medical infrastructure in relation to COVID-19 cases simply during the first 6 months of this pandemic. This took place across 40 countries, of which a number are also facing armed conflict. In addition, since the start of the pandemic, we have seen a troubling rise in cyber attacks against hospitals and other healthcare facilities, delaying and disrupting a range of critical health services when they are needed most. When armed conflict and the COVID-19 pandemic overlap, and protecting medical care and other essential services, as well as the infrastructure they rely on, is more critical than ever. This makes the important theme of today's Arria Formula meeting on cyber attacks against critical infrastructure most timely. As the Secretary General noted in his 2020 report on the protection of civilians, the digitization and interconnectivity of the healthcare and energy sectors means that the frequency and impact of cyber attacks on healthcare, electrical and water infrastructure could become increasingly widespread. Cyber attacks, cyber attacks against industrial control systems that operate critical civil infrastructure such as electrical or water and sanitation facilities can cause significant harm to populations. The energy sector is known to regularly come under cyber attacks. The disruption of electricity grids can deprive large numbers of people of electrical power, as we have seen in the Ukraine, for instance. Our water treatment facilities are also vulnerable to cyber attack, with the risk of disrupting the provision of drinking water and leading to shortages in supply. The increased digitization and interconnectivity we see in the healthcare sector has made it more vulnerable to attack as well. Cyber attacks have jeopardized healthcare services in places like the UK, the Czech Republic, France, Spain, Thailand, and the United States, at times forcing the postponement of surgeries, compromising patient data, disrupting health services, including the processing of COVID-19 tests. And research in the US has revealed that hospitals facing cyber attacks and data breaches have seen a rise in the mortality rates of certain patients because of delays in administering tests. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Interpol has reported a rise in ransomware attacks against hospitals and other healthcare facilities. Research into COVID-19 testing, treatment, and vaccines has also proven vulnerable to cyber attack, with worrisome implications for all of us. While it may not always be clear whether these cyber attacks are connected to situations of armed conflict, we know that some have taken place in situations of ongoing armed conflict and have affected countries taking part in armed conflict. We also know that, particularly in situations of these conflicts, the disruption of critical civil infrastructure can have a devastating effect on civilians in the immediate and longer term and can hamper those humanitarian activities which we are rendering today. International law sets some important limits on cyber attacks. The General Assembly has confirmed that international law, and in particular the Charter of the United Nations, is applicable and essential to maintaining peace and stability and promoting an open, secure, stable, accessible, and peaceful information and communications technology environment. In addition, an increasing number of states recognize that international humanitarian law, IHL, applies to cyber operations during armed conflicts without legitimizing or encouraging the resort to force in the first place. IHL aims to limit the humanitarian consequences of armed conflict. In the conduct of hostilities, it limits the tactics and weapons that parties to armed conflict may resort to, with a view to minimizing human suffering. The fundamental rules of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in and against the effects of attacks all serve this particular aim. IHL also sets out rules that specifically address the protection of medical facilities and other infrastructure vital to civilians. Medical units and transports, such as hospitals, clinics, and ambulances, must be respected and protected in all circumstances. In addition, IHL prohibits attacking, destroying, removing, or rendering useless objects that are indispensable to the survival, or rendering useless objects that are indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as drinking water as installations. As the Secretary General has noted, further reflection is needed to identify ways of reducing the potential human cost of cyber operations during armed conflict and to work towards consensus in the interpretation of IHL as it applies to them. The UN open-ended working group on developments in the field of information and telecommunications in the context of international security, and the group of governmental experts on advancing responsible state behavior in cyberspace in the context of international security are doing important work to address how international law applies to the use of information and communication technologies, ICTs, in other words. In the context of the UN open-ended working group, the ICRC recently proposed a new norm of responsible state behavior in cyberspace that required that states not conduct or knowingly support ICT activity that would harm medical services or medical facilities and take measures to protect medical services from harm. In May of this year, more than 40 international leaders called on governments to take immediate and decisive action to stop cyber attacks on healthcare in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, including by reaffirming and recommitting to the international rules that prohibit such attacks. In March, and again this month, in August, a large number of international law scholars signed 2 Oxford statements regarding relevant international law rules and principles relating to malicious cyber operations targeting healthcare facilities and vital vaccines. Both Oxford statements encourage all states to consider these rules and principles when developing national positions and in relevant multilateral processes and deliberations. In combination with addressing the application of international law and formulating new norms of responsible state behavior, governments, the private sector, civil society, academic institutions, and other stakeholders have proposed a range of practical measures and options for international cooperation to avoid the human cost of cyber attacks. I look forward to hearing today's distinguished briefers and to the ensuing discussion on ways to protect critical infrastructure against cyber attacks and how international law and norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace serve to protect it. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much again for this opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to speak here.
Thank you very much, Ramesh, for your important briefing. Now I would like to invite my old friend, Peter. Peter, thanks so much for co-hosting, and you have the floor. Peter, you have to unmute your mic. We cannot hear you. Please unmute, Peter. Okay.
Is that better?
Good. Continue.
Okay, so colleagues, dear friends, thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks to the government of Indonesia and especially to you, to Ambassador Jani, for the invitation to address you today. When the ICRC is invited to speak with the Security Council, I normally report on the plight of civilians in the most acute humanitarian crises. Today is a little bit different. I'm addressing the real and growing threat posed by cyber attacks against critical civilian infrastructure, and I call on you to prevent what some experts consider a humanitarian crisis in the making. Over the past years, cyber operations against critical infrastructures have caused significant economic harm, disruption in societies, and tensions amongst states. While the ICRC cannot confirm clearly any cyber operations with human casualties, we are increasingly concerned about the destructive effects of cyber operations, such as electricity supplies and water systems cut off in war-affected countries, hospital services halted in the middle of global pandemics, an attempt attack against the petrochemical plant, and especially alarmingly, cyber attacks against nuclear facilities. Among the countless malicious cyber operations that are reported daily, cyber attacks against critical civilian infrastructure stand out due to the significant risk they pose for human life. If hospitals cannot provide life-saving treatment in the middle of a health crisis or an armed conflict, whole communities will suffer. If electricity supply is interrupted, there is a real risk that water, healthcare, and other essential services will be disrupted. And if even nuclear facilities are not considered off limits, we risk seeing severe and widespread humanitarian consequences. Dear colleagues, the frequency of sophisticated cyber attacks against critical civilian infrastructure is increasing and evolving faster than anticipated only a few years ago. While most operations have been conducted without an apparent link to conflict, we are concerned that cyber capabilities used in future conflicts will cause graver consequences, in particular for civilians. The use of cyber operations during conflict is no longer a hypothetical scenario. Over the past years, several states have stated publicly that they use cyber operations in military operations. As an increasing number of states are developing military cyber capabilities, the ICRC expects that their use is likely to also increase in future conflicts. The ICRC therefore welcomes the Security Council's increasing engagement on the topic of harmful cyber operations, alongside the important discussions in the two General Assembly mandated processes. Ensuring the maintenance of international peace and security in a digitalized world and protecting civilians from harm during conflict is a pressing task that states must address now. It is not too late to take effective preventive measures. Preventive measures are needed on several levels. To start, averting human harm caused by cyber operations needs a strong legal framework. The ICRC has called on states to reaffirm and clarify the legal framework that protects critical civilian infrastructure against cyber operations, in particular during conflict. In May this year, I joined a group of global leaders to call on all governments to work together and assert unequivocally, in unequivocal terms, cyber operations against healthcare facilities are unlawful and unacceptable in times of crisis, in times of conflict, at all times. This public call responded to an increase in cyber operations against medical facilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Beyond health systems, there is a need for greater clarity on the legal framework governing cyber operations against critical civilian infrastructure, water and sanitation systems, electricity supply, installations containing dangerous forces. This concern is especially acute in times of conflict. International humanitarian law restricts all means and methods of warfare, be they new or old, cyber or traditional. Its core rules are concrete, practical, and well established. There should not be any doubt on the prohibition to attack civilian infrastructure, to attack medical facilities during conflict, whether through bombs or cyber means. The ICRC calls on all states to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure against the effects of cyber operations during conflict in accordance with international humanitarian law. The ICRC also emphasizes that the rules of the UN Charter on the prohibition of the use of force and on the maintenance of peace and security are of utmost importance in cyberspace. However, in the event of war, IHL is effectively the last layer of legal protections for victims of conflicts. Its applicability is also without prejudice to the question of whether additional rules or legal instruments are required to govern cyberspace. Dear colleagues, even a strong legal framework is not by itself sufficient to effectively shield civilians and civilian infrastructure from hostile cyber operations. Confidence-building measures, capacity-building efforts, and a broad range of technical and operational measures are needed. No state can succeed in this alone. Instead, broad collaboration amongst states as well as between states, the private sector and academia is essential. Private companies and academia drive innovation in cyberspace. They have valuable perspectives to contribute, and they need to be heard and integrated in our reflections. As the president of a humanitarian organization whose work is critical to millions of victims of conflicts around the world, I'm acutely aware of the challenges in managing a safe digital transformation. At the ICRC, we strive to use new technologies to work more effectively and to deliver improved services for affected community members. However, we are aware that even humanitarian organizations are not spared from malicious cyber operations. In addition, we are acutely aware of the critical need to protect data in order to maintain the trust of affected communities in neutral, impartial, and independent humanitarian action. Our teams work tirelessly to ensure the safety of our digital infrastructure, to protect us and communities affected by conflict that benefit from the ICRC's work. We train our staff on cybersecurity. We also aim to build partnerships across sectors to develop innovative solutions to strengthen our data and operational security. To respond to humanitarian needs in 2020, the ICRC needs a safe and trusted digital humanitarian space in which our operational information and, most importantly, the data collected from individuals are secure. In response to the rapid pace of technological change, the opportunities this brings for humanitarian organization and the acute data protection challenges facing the sector, the ICRC with the Brussels Privacy Hub has just released the second edition of its Data Protection Handbook. Developed together with humanitarian organizations, data protection authorities, academia, civil society, and the tech sector, the handbook provides key guidance on the interpretation of core data protection principles in humanitarian action. The handbook is already widely used in the humanitarian sector, and we trust states will find its guidance equally valuable. To conclude, the ICRC congratulates Indonesia and the co-sponsors for continuing the important discussion on harmful cyber operations with the Security Council. The ICRC encourages all member states to act on the legal, policy, and operational level to prevent cyber operations from causing harm to critical civilian infrastructure. Cyber attacks are a known threat. Now it's time for preventive action. I thank you.
I thank the president of the ICRC, Mr. Peter Maurer, for his statement. And we've taken note of all the important points you mentioned. Now I would like to invite Ms. Renata Dwan, the director of the UNIDIR. Madam,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellency Transiggiani, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me add my words of appreciation to the permanent missions of Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and indeed the ICRC for convening today's Arria Formula meeting. This is the 5th time that the Council has met in this arrangement to discuss issues related to cyber threats. And like Peter before me, I'm particularly grateful that the focus of today's meeting is on the human cost of cyber attacks and the significant harm that malicious cyber acts cause for the safety and well-being of people and communities around the world. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, as my fellow panelists have noted, inflict serious injuries and damage to civilians in situations of armed conflict and beyond. And I'm hopeful that by focusing on our shared responsibilities to protect civilian populations, we can find agreement on practical ways to defend, anticipate, react, and respond to cyber attacks on the services that are essential to people's safety, security, and well-being in both conflict and non-conflict scenarios. My fellow panelists have covered quite a lot of important points, so I will try to summarize 3 points that can perhaps contribute to your discussion today. The first is really the expanding field of what can be considered critical infrastructure and what this means for collective efforts to tackle cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Second, the evolving nature of cyber threats to critical infrastructure and the implications that this poses for states to respond. And then third, I'll touch on something that both speakers mentioned, but the possible measures that member states can take to operationalize existing legal and especially normative frameworks to protect critical infrastructure. So perhaps turning to the first theme, at the heart of the concept of critical infrastructure is systems that provide essential services such as water systems, electrical grids, hospital and medical centers, and healthcare centers. There are well-established frameworks, Peter noted some of them, to identify and protect such critical infrastructures, especially in situations of armed conflict. But digital advances and the expansion of malicious cyber acts against digital infrastructure have demonstrated the critical and perhaps growing importance of other types of infrastructure. Secretary General Guterres, in his roadmap for digital cooperation, has highlighted the importance of the public core of the internet. That's the infrastructure of the internet, such as data centers, that allows ordinary people to engage in and avail of all the promise that cyberspace provides. National electoral machinery and systems have attracted significant public attention as a source of potential cyber attack and as essential for the exercise of people's political and civil rights. Many states and multi-stakeholder groups are highlighting the number of supranational, or what we might call global, critical infrastructures on which international, domestic, and local services rely. These include global financial networks, civil aviation controls, satellites or underground cables on which global communications and logistics depend. These infrastructures cannot be defined, owned, or defended by any single state or actor in isolation, but they all have a huge impact on communities and on the well-being of civilians. The current global health crisis is further accelerating the expansion of what might be deemed critical infrastructure. A range of new services could be deemed essential for the safety and well-being of people and communities. Medical and food delivery services, for example, are coming to the fore. And my OCHA colleague noted the importance of vaccine research, which may expand our considerations of what is considered as critical to protect from cyber attack. Now, while states define their critical infrastructure according to national prerogatives, shared understandings on what is considered critical can help states and other stakeholders in putting in place measures to protect infrastructure from cyber attacks, whether at national, regional, or international levels. It can help states agree on what is and is not to be included in policies and in frameworks for responsible state behavior. And in the context of the protection of civilians in situations of armed conflict, it can support transparency and predictability in the context of responses and reactions and preparedness for cyber threats. My second point is that our understanding of what constitutes critical infrastructure, as that evolves, so too is the cyber threat landscape evolving. As digital technology advances, older, less sophisticated systems are particularly vulnerable to attack. Countries facing protracted crises or armed conflict may rely on outmoded transport, health, water, and sanitation infrastructures, which have very limited resilience to cyber attacks. But vulnerability to cyber attack is not only a consequence of weak or outdated infrastructures. In more technologically advanced countries where almost all of daily life is moving online, the growing interconnectedness of digital systems is expanding the range of surfaces for cyber attack. This can impact, for example, the remittances sent to fragile or conflict-affected states by migrant workers, and on which families and communities may hugely depend. Third, advances in artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, are enabling more destructive and successful cyber attacks that can target a much wider civilian population or a humanitarian response effort. The potential of more powerful cyber attacks on a more connected digital system requires a much more holistic and integrated approach to anticipation, prevention, response, and recovery. The scale of this challenge can seem daunting, but as other speakers have noted, we're not working with a blank slate. And that brings me to my third point on the measures that member states can put in place to operationalize existing works that may support cyber resilience of critical infrastructure. As Mr. Maurer has highlighted, member states have agreed that international law applies to cyberspace. But in addition, member states agreed by consensus in 2015 a set of authoritative, voluntary, non-binding norms recommended by the group of governmental experts on developments in the field of ICT. 3 of these 11 norms are specifically aimed at preventing and mitigating the disruption of assets and services vital to the functioning of our societies. Specifically, they urge states to refrain from conducting or supporting ICT activity against critical infrastructure, noting that it is contrary to their obligations under international law. These norms call on states to implement appropriate measures to protect their critical infrastructure, and they also encourage states to assist each other when critical infrastructure is a target of a malicious cyber operation. So the call for restraint is in essence a call to states to meet their existing obligations in international law. The call for states to take proactive action to secure their critical infrastructure goes beyond strict legal obligations. And the proactive actions that have been identified and by states include a series of measures, for example, establishing a designated critical infrastructure protection national authority. They include implementing early warning systems for cyber attacks and putting in place a national network of 24/7 emergency points of contact. They also emphasize and propose establishing relationships between the different stakeholders that, as other speakers have noted, go beyond states. Industry, public-private partnerships, civil society partnerships with other stakeholders that can be critical to enable regular communication and collaboration with stakeholders, such as, for example, owners and operators of civilian infrastructure. They also include establishing and implementing supply chain security standard and taking measures to identify and report, resolve critical vulnerabilities. The norm calling on the promotion of international cooperation and assistance in cases of cyber attacks is also rooted in international law and practice. Now, one of the challenges in establishing international assistance and mitigation arrangements to states that have had a cyber attack is the lack of a universally agreed definition of critical infrastructure or the designation of certain assets as critical. So one of the recommendations for concrete action is that states that have not already done so may wish to identify what they consider critical infrastructure and the steps required to protect them. Building from this, greater transparency of states' national and regional cybersecurity policies can help build confidence, support exchange of information and knowledge, and promote a shared understanding of what critical infrastructure constitutes and what protecting it entails. Communication between states is equally critical and is one of the issues currently being discussed in the current GGE and open-ended working group processes. There, they're discussing whether states could utilize existing regional 24/7 points of contact networks, or even establish new UN-wide networks for emergency contacts. In some regional instances, for example, the European Union, such networks are already in place. States could also elaborate on the methodology of requests for assistance and mitigation support, focusing on substance and procedure. In the absence of a shared critical infrastructure definition, the development of standard assistant request templates could help states communicate what type of assistance they need and allow the state that is being requested to quickly evaluate whether they're in a position to assist or respond. The type of assistance and mitigation support that states may provide is, of course, dependent on existing national capacity. At a minimum, however, states should respond or at least acknowledge a request for support once again, there's no prescribed standard, but what is timely manner will depend on the circumstances of the incident. The effectiveness of any such network, as well as the mitigation or assistance capacity of states, would be enhanced by regular domestic, regional, or even international cyber incident response exercises, which is another long-standing recommendation of the group of government experts. Ultimately, restraint, protection, and cooperation against cyber attacks will only be possible where states and communities have the capacity and know-how to engage. And this is why capacity building is such a critical component to increasing the resilience of critical civilian infrastructure. Increased capacity can help states in determining their cyber priorities and also in putting in place arrangements to support resilience. I'll conclude by just noting that this global pandemic is, as many have highlighted, a unique crisis, but also opportunity. It reveals just how much we rely on cyberspace for the functioning of all aspects of societies. The global health crisis illustrates just how diverse and multifaceted those threats are. And while COVID-19 reveals the human cost of infectious disease spread in our increasingly interconnected world, it is showing equally the human impact of cyber attacks. Above all, it is showing us that cyber threats do not observe our neat political and legal distinctions of conflicts and of borders. Threats to international peace and security in the absence of armed conflict can be significant and multifaceted. The Council and the Member States have a range of legal and normative and political instruments at their disposal to address them. And there is a real opportunity to act now. So once again, Mr. President and your co-host, thank you for this opportunity to brief the Council, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Van. It's an honor to have you briefing us today. Now, dear colleagues, I would like to invite the Council members for their remarks and intervention. But of course, I will start with speaking on behalf of my own national capacity to share Indonesia's views, and then inviting the co-host. Now, dear colleagues, with the ever-increasing cyber connectivity, critical infrastructure is exposed to an array of threats and vulnerabilities, which raise new security concerns. Such challenges are faced by an ever-growing number of countries. Indonesia is therefore of the view that protection of critical infrastructures against cyber attacks will become even more important in the future. With that in mind, allow me to underline a few messages. First, we need to acknowledge that cyber attacks on critical infrastructure can have widespread consequences, including humanitarian. More attention needs to be paid on cyber attacks against critical infrastructure by both state and non-state actors, including proxies. Cyber attacks also pose risks toward instability in international peace and security, with consequences becoming uncontrollable, even potentially claiming human lives. The second point is the protection of critical infrastructures requires strengthening of norms, international law, as well as national legislation. The principle of international law and the UN Charter provide the fundamental framework in guiding states on their use of ICT. Indonesia supports the norms of responsible state behavior outlined in the UNGA Resolution 70/237. There must not be any intentional damage or impairment in the use and operation of critical infrastructure. The norm also underlined the importance of appropriate measures by states to protect their critical infrastructure from the ICT threat, with due regard to their applicable national laws. To that end, Indonesia supports the ongoing processes in the General Assembly, particularly through the current meaningful work of the CGE, GGE, and the OEWG. There is also a need to widen understanding and deepen engagement among countries and regions, including to address divergent views on some of the major concepts in international law that apply in cyberspace. Since there is no universal concept of critical infrastructure, the determination of critical infrastructure lies in domestic domain. Therefore, it is necessary to address gaps in cyber resilience among countries in not only ICT infrastructure, and to build capacity for the implementation of international law and cyberspace norms within the national policy frameworks. The third point is bilateral, regional, and global efforts are necessary and mutually reinforcing in the advancement of common understanding on cybersecurity issues. More capacity and confidence building measures are required to bolster stability of cyberspace. This process should involve private sector, technical community, and civil society. It is our hope that today's rich discussion will help to inform the Council in responding appropriately to the ever-growing challenges for the maintenance of peace and security related to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Now, with that end of my national statement, I would like to invite my fellow co-hosts, the distinguished representative of Belgium. Karen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And let me first of all show my appreciation to you, Gianni, and to the Indonesian presidency for hosting this meeting. And of course, I want also to thank the briefers for their very comprehensive but somewhat sobering statements. Belgium is particularly honored to co-sponsor this very timely event. Mr. President, cyber attacks regularly target critical infrastructures, amongst others, electricity networks, water facilities, civil aviation structures, and even nuclear facilities, putting human lives at risk. Since the beginning of the pandemic COVID-19, cyber attacks against these essential services to the public have been reported in several countries. Those against medical facilities are particularly appalling, as the healthcare system is at its most vulnerable while it is the most needed. Belgium therefore strongly condemns these cyber attacks against critical infrastructures. First, they are unlawful with regards to the international law, and second, they are morally unacceptable. Mr. President, the international community, and particularly the United Nations, have done a lot of efforts to tackle the issue, with a view to both build a shared international understanding on the governance of cyberspace and develop real actions to implement this vision on the ground. Belgium strongly supports the ongoing debates within the UN framework. More specifically, my country is active on 3 front lines. First, Belgium advocates a shared vision of a global, free, open, stable, peaceful, and secure cyberspace where human rights and fundamental freedoms and rule of law apply. This shared understanding is built upon an inclusive approach in which all stakeholders, including civil society, the private sector, and the academic world, are heard. Second, we are of the view that the international community must continue to strive for a truly universal cyber security framework for responsible state behavior. This has to be based on existing international law, including the UN Charter in its entirety, international humanitarian law, and international human rights laws. Third, Belgium endeavors to fight impunity for the most serious crimes, also in the digital world. This is why Belgium has joined Liechtenstein in its initiative to create a Council of Advisors on the application of the Rome Statute to cyber warfare in order to explore the role of the International Criminal Court could play in this new regulatory framework. Mr. President, this is a truly global challenge in which states have a central role to play. They should refrain from actions that undermine international safety and security, and if necessary, be held responsible for their actions. Of course, we also have to make words be followed by actions in order to make a difference. That is why my country, together with European partners, puts so much emphasis on regional and global cooperation mechanism, as well as on multi-stakeholder engagement. Mr. President, whether in times of peace or during an armed conflict, what we do not tolerate in the physical world, we should not tolerate in the virtual one. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. Now I would like to invite my co-host, Estonia. Ambassador Gert, you have the floor, Gert.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished speakers and listeners, first allow me to express my appreciation to Indonesia for convening this timely Arria Formula meeting of the Security Council. We are honored to co-sponsor this event, which continues to draw the Security Council's attention to the implications of cyber threats to international peace and security. I also thank the briefers for their insightful interventions. During the ongoing global pandemic, reliance on critical infrastructure is greater than ever. This meeting is held at a critical time when a number of states have to manage a high rate of COVID-19 patients. At the same time, over the course of the first half of 2020, healthcare facilities across the globe reported an increasing number of incidents targeting their infrastructure. Needless to say, in a global health crisis, medical services and medical facilities have become the critical infrastructure that all our societies rely on. In addition to ensuring access to health services, it is now necessary to address possible humanitarian consequences that may stem from inadequate protection of critical infrastructure or irresponsible behavior of malicious actors in cyberspace. Globally, there are vast differences between how states mobilize their expertise and resources to ensure cyber resilience. During a global pandemic, it is important to raise awareness about cyber threats and share best practices. Cooperation with other countries is one of the central elements on how Estonia has approached the question of critical infrastructure protection beyond its borders. Estonian experts, government, as well as private sector have been working on a number of projects that facilitate dissemination of best cyber resilience practices regionally and globally. I myself have co-led the EU Cyber for Development program in Mauritius in my previous capacity as Director of International Relations of the Estonian National Cybersecurity Agency, Arria. Many international and regional organizations such as the European Union, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, the OAS, ASEAN, African Union have been active in sharing best practices and building capacities to address cyber threats globally. Mr. President, achieving a global, free, open, stable, peaceful and secure cyberspace requires also a shared understanding of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. It has been agreed in the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts 2013 report that international law applies to cyberspace. This also includes important bodies of international law, such as international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The GGE 2015 report highlights two important norms that claim that a state should not conduct or knowingly support ICT activity contrary to its obligations under international law, that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public. The same report also claims that states should take appropriate measures to protect their critical infrastructure from ICT threats. Estonia fully supports these agreed upon norms and calls for their implementation. On 22 May, Estonia organized a Security Council Arria formula meeting on cyber stability, conflict prevention, and capacity building that addressed responsible state behavior in cyberspace. In conclusion, the topic of critical infrastructure protection and bolstering cyber resilience requires effective international cooperation, implementation of norms, and capacity building. On 20 April, Estonia condemned malicious cyber activities against the medical sector and called for respecting norms of responsible state behavior and for the upholding of international law in cyberspace. It is now more important than ever to uphold the norms, abide by the international law in cyberspace, and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gert. Next on my list, my co-host, Vietnam, Ambassador Cui.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the people for their contribution and insight. The critical infrastructure are the backbone of our modern life and substantial to public welfare, national economy, security, and defense. So safeguarding our critical infrastructure is therefore an economic and security imperative. As our society becomes more digitalized, information and communication technologies, ICT, become central to the operation of several systems of critical infrastructure. Given the interconnected nature of critical infrastructures, the cyber attacks on one sector can affect others, leading to disruption of the backbone breakdowns. So in some cases, cyber attacks on airport or hospital can cause serious human harms. The ripple effect of the large attack on one country can be felt not only in their neighboring country, but also globally. So we thank Indonesia for heightening the international community attention to this critical topic, and we are pleased to join Indonesia together with Belgium, Estonia, and ICRC to co-hosting the event. So my delegation is firmly convinced that the efforts to protect the critical infrastructures from cyber attack require cooperation at regional, international level, and across sectors and across public and private stakeholders. First, an effective collaboration among states will nurture trust, de-escalate tensions, prevent conflict in cyberspace, and develop common understanding among states. A coordinated approach will help states build ICT capacity and enhance resilience and preparedness. Second, states should take the primary responsibility for their protection of their critical infrastructures. Nonetheless, it should be noted that several critical infrastructure are owned and operated by private firms and technology companies supporting the ICT platform. Therefore, a public-private partnership is crucial in sharing information and expertise, monitoring and mitigating the risk involved. Third, our cooperation must be guided by international law and the principle of the United Nations Charter, together with voluntary, non-binding norms setting out rules for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. In this regard, we support the development of normative framework on cyberspace through a participatory, transparent, inclusive, government-led process under the auspices of the United Nations. In closing, allow me to stress Vietnam's commitment to cooperate with all countries and partners to ensure that the cyberspace at national, regional, and global level is safe, friendly, open, and stable to meet legitimate needs of the interest of all states and people, and contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Kui. Just to inform colleagues that we have approximately 40 additional speakers. Now, I would like to invite members of the Security Council for their intervention. And just to remind delegation, we would like to encourage of not more than 3 minutes because we have a long list of speakers. Now, the first on my list is the distinguished representative of the United States of America. Rodney, my good friend, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I will try to keep this as short as possible. Thank you as well to Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam for calling this very important meeting today. Thank you as well to Ramesh, Peter, and Renata for your really informative briefings. It was great to hear what you had to say today. The United States believes strongly that all UN member states must work together to safeguard the extraordinary benefits of cyberspace. UN member states have been considering the security of cyberspace for more than 2 decades, remain focused on 2 key areas of work: domestic cybersecurity policy best practices and how to achieve and maintain international cyber stability. Throughout all these discussions, the security of critical infrastructure has been of paramount importance. The COVID-19 pandemic has only served to underline the importance of these issues to all of us. Not only do we all rely increasingly on information and communications technologies for our daily life and business, as you, Mr. President, are showing very clearly through this virtual discussion today, but they've also become vital tools in the fight to contain the spread of the virus and to ensure the implementation of healthcare strategies. The United States is increasingly concerned about cyber risks to hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, and the broader healthcare systems that rely on ICT infrastructure to function. We're further concerned that malicious cyber activity, which impairs the ability of hospitals and healthcare systems to deliver critical services, could have deadly results. To protect against these risks and threats, we are working with partners across the globe to issue technical alerts and to raise the level of awareness and provide mitigation recommendations. These alerts include warning organizations researching COVID-19 responses of likely targeting and network compromise by malicious actors, as well as partnering with other countries to raise awareness on advanced persistent threat activity targeting healthcare and essential services. Malicious activity against critical infrastructure is deeply irresponsible and it's dangerous, as has been mentioned by many today. Anyone who engages in such an action should expect consequences. The United States has zero tolerance for malicious cyber activity designed to undermine US and international partners' efforts to protect, assist, and inform the public at any time, but especially during this global pandemic. Through several consensus General Assembly resolutions in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the UN has underlined a set of best practices for national approaches to cybersecurity. States must have effective domestic policies and strategies to manage cyber risks and protect networked critical infrastructure. Establishing threat information sharing processes with private sector infrastructure owners and operators is one example of these best practices. When states do not have the resources to do so themselves, cyber capacity building can assist in these efforts. The UN First Committee has confronted existing and potential threats posed by the use of ICT since 1998 in a coordinated international effort to enhance international stability in cyberspace and prevent conflict between states arising from such ICT use. In particular, the UN Group of Governmental Experts, or the GGE, reports of 2010, 2013, and 2015 outline a framework of responsible state behavior in the area of international stability in cyberspace. The United States has been and will continue to be a leader in these efforts and continues to advocate for states to implement and adhere to the GGE framework, which consists of the application of relevant international law to state activities in cyberspace, voluntary non-binding norms of state behavior applicable in peacetime, and the implementation of practical confidence building measures. The United States joined the unanimous commitment in GA Resolution 70/237 to have this framework guide states' use of ICT. The robust program of work at the UN has provided important guidance for UN member states in the area of critical infrastructure. First, states are responsible for ensuring that their own domestic infrastructures are protected from cyber risks. Second, all responsible states should adhere to the framework of responsible state behavior, which includes refraining from malicious cyber activity that intentionally damages critical infrastructure in peacetime, as well as respecting the robust protections for such infrastructure in international law. And third, in the event of a cyber incident affecting critical infrastructure, states should cooperate with each other to mitigate damage, assist victims, and hold those responsible accountable. Unfortunately, despite the commitments that all member states have made to be guided by this framework, some have conducted irresponsible state behavior. The international community must be prepared to hold these bad actors accountable for their irresponsible actions. The ongoing GGE and OEWG have been tasked to build upon the UN's robust work in this area, including the framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And it's only through member states' full implementation of these recommendations and our willingness to hold these states accountable when they act contrary to the framework that we'll be able to fully achieve international cyber stability. The United States will always work to uphold the stability of cyberspace and the related framework on responsible state behavior, including through the 2 UN mechanisms. Despite the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic, the international community must continue to work together to safeguard the extraordinary benefits of cyberspace for everyone. The United States will continue to lead the way on that. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, Rodney. Next on my list, United Kingdom, Sonia. Sonia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first, I'd like to thank Indonesia, along with Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the ICRC for bringing the issue of cyber attacks against critical infrastructure to the Security Council in this open and inclusive Arria format. Thank you to all of the briefers for their very informative briefings. The people of the United Kingdom, as elsewhere, rely on critical national and international infrastructure day in, day out. Rapid digitalization of our national infrastructure has brought about tremendous opportunities for improved public service provision. But insecure or poorly implemented technologies also bring risk. Interruption to any of our critical services could cause serious disruption to our lives and damage our economy. Technology continues to develop at unprecedented pace and in unparalleled complexity. Malicious or accidental exploitation of vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, whether owned by states or private companies, solely within national boundaries or operating across international borders, can incur the most serious of consequences. The UK is no stranger to such incidents. In May 2017, the reckless release of uncontrolled ransomware known as WannaCry disrupted the UK National Health Service. This activity did not specifically target the UK's critical infrastructure, but it demonstrated the potential consequences of failing to manage risk to that infrastructure effectively. This was not a new threat. Indeed, my own government's experts had issued critical alerts relating to this specific vulnerability. But work to move away from legacy systems and improve resilience was not sufficiently prioritized. We understood this threat, but we did not act. The UN has a crucial role to play in ensuring that others both understand the risk and take action. Resolutions 58/199 and 64/211 referenced in the concept note provide an excellent starting point. All states should determine the extent of their own critical national infrastructure, understand dependencies, and consider domestic frameworks to encourage cyber resilience in their essential services. Sharing best practice in these approaches and cooperating across borders are crucial elements of strengthening our international resilience. But domestic resilience alone cannot mitigate the impact of large-scale disruptive cyber attacks or reckless and indiscriminate behavior. The current global situation has brought into sharper focus the inherent threats and opportunities in the sphere of ICTs and international security. Attacks by state and non-state actors seeking to undermine the global response to this unprecedented global health crisis, for instance, endangers lives. So the United Kingdom underscores the need to maintain a steady and dedicated focus on implementing the framework of responsible state behavior, developed together here in the United Nations and endorsed by the General Assembly in 2015. Crucial that UN member states comply with international law and uphold the voluntary and non-binding norms of responsible state behavior in relation to cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. All states have an important role to play to help counter irresponsible activity being carried out by criminal groups in their countries. The UK will continue to counter those who conduct reckless cyber attacks for their own malicious ends. To enable states to hold perpetrators to account in line with this consensus and to deter further malicious cyber activity around the world, we underline the urgent call to increase cybersecurity capacity building which underpins these efforts. We welcome the role of the UN Security Council in hosting debates such as this one to raise member states' awareness of the detailed discussions within the UN system which are addressing these challenges. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sonia. Now I would like to invite Germany, the Ambassador Günther. Günther? You have the floor, Günther. Unmute, yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the ICRC for organizing this important Arria meeting on cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. It's timely that we have this discussion today. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically underlined the extent to which we are dependent on digital devices and the internet. They are the backbone of many essential public services. Digital devices and the internet make us vulnerable to cyber attacks. Also, during the pandemic, we have seen malicious cyber activities such as phishing, malware distribution, and denial of service attacks. Some of these are targeting critical infrastructure. In some cases, they are directed against critical infrastructure we rely on to manage this global crisis, including the health sector. Germany strongly condemns such attacks. They are deplorable and endanger people's lives. States should strictly refrain from supporting ICT activity contrary to their obligations under international law, not least in the light of the potential to create and escalate international tensions. In particular, no actor should jeopardize the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet, which is vital to the stability of cyberspace. Trust can easily be lost in cyberspace, and the risk of escalation of small misunderstandings into full-blown conflicts is real. We thus support all efforts directed at exchanging information and close cooperation between states. Germany believes this is an important topic for the Security Council. We share the conviction that existing international law, notably the UN Charter and international humanitarian law, applies equally offline and online. We support the implementation of the existing voluntary, non-binding norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Therefore, we actively engage in both of the current UN groups tasked with further developing the existing frameworks. Our commitment to a rules-based international order for cyberspace is only one pillar of our approach to international cybersecurity. It is complemented by our efforts to build up credible deterrence against cyber attacks. We are constantly increasing our resilience. Together with other partners in the European Union, for example, we have put in place a cyber sanctions regime, which allows us to respond to cyber attacks in a firm, effective, and targeted manner. If our security is compromised, we will not hesitate to use this instrument and have sanctions again. Our activities do not stop here. Germany is actively engaging in the Paris Call, which brings together states and private actors to advance cyberspace stability. Also, Germany is actively promoting confidence-building measures initiated by the OSCE. Germany supports the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise and is part of the World Bank Digital Development Partnership to advance capacity building. And Germany also promotes the regulation of the military use of artificial intelligence and lethal autonomous weapons. Cooperation in cyberspace is a key component of the Alliance for Multilateralism and will be discussed during its next meeting in the margins of the high-level week in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Günther. Next on my list, I would like to invite the Dominican Republic, Ambassador Jose.
Thank you. We thank Indonesia Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, ICRC for convening this event. We also thank the briefers for sharing their expertise on this critical issue. Cyber attacks are increasingly frequent, dangerous, and more targeted. Many are designed by advanced, sophisticated actors to damage or disrupt critical state and civilian infrastructure that deliver vital services to the population. We have followed with great concerns the reports of cybersecurity-related incidents targeting medical and research facilities around the world, many of which are directly involved in responding to the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic. We agree that cyber operations against healthcare facilities and other critical civilian infrastructure are unlawful under IHL, therefore unacceptable. However, due to their immediate impact on the public, other types of infrastructures are also predisposed to be targeted, thus causing enormous destabilizing damage to any member state. These have a major impact on those that are not prepared to face such attacks. In our view, the most likely future attacks are those aimed at vital industries and services deemed most vulnerable. Financially motivated actors are likely to scout and hold ransom in sectors with major access to the public in order to infect a large number of individuals or network systems, leaving their privacy and security compromised. The impact to daily life could be dire, particularly during the increased number of individuals working from home during the pandemic. Actors taking advantage of intelligence and private information are more likely to conduct planned, strategic attacks designed to stifle or cripple a member state's progress towards stability. These attacks are fast-growing, emerging threat to international peace and security. Just imagine a cyber attack on a member state's healthcare system or healthcare workers at the height of their surging COVID-19 cases, or to key stakeholders during peace negotiations or during national elections. The most effective measures in protecting critical infrastructure and services against cyber attacks are those that are basic, transparent, and up-to-date. Policies aimed at regulating operating systems and network systems with optimal levels of protection are also key. With the support of the United Nations, member states need to establish a forum or network to promote the dissemination of safeguard measures. This forum could also serve as a platform to coordinate international and regional efforts to share successful safeguards techniques and legal frameworks. It could also capitalize public and private partnerships to joint efforts, share information and experience at all levels in order to prevent, protect, disrupt, investigate, and recover from cyber attacks. The UN Security Council has a leading responsibility to call for increased routine technical discussions to better understand the global cybersecurity threat. Colleagues, these efforts could include the creation of a shared list of global cyber threats and trends. This would assist member states, the UN system, including the Security Council, to work within their mandates to promote the protection of critical infrastructure, particularly the most vulnerable to cyber attacks. Let me reiterate, however, that in conflict situations, this does not replace the legal obligations of parties to conflict under IHL to protect civilian infrastructure, as well as humanitarian workers. To conclude, the Dominican Republic recognizes that cybersecurity threats are a global problem and therefore calls for international solutions involving all stakeholders who are shared responsibility for prosecuting and punishing those responsible must be assumed. Thank you.
I thank Ambassador Singer for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa. Sorry. My apology. I now give the floor to the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies and colleagues, I would like to thank Indonesia and the co-hosts for convening this meeting. Cybersecurity threats, primarily those against critical infrastructure, are one of the most significant strategic risks for some member states, threatening their national security, economic prosperity, and public safety. In this connection, we commend those states who have made significant strides towards tackling these threats by creating national policies and capabilities that seek to deter and protect against cyber attacks. As the pace of globalization intensifies and our nations and peoples increasingly depend on cross-border flows of capital, information, and services facilitated by communications technology, the threats of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, such as healthcare facilities, electrical power grids, and telecommunication networks that are essential for the functioning of our societies, would only increase. As a matter of urgency, clear rules of cyber engagement are needed to protect the privacy of citizens, safeguard the integrity of democratic electoral processes, and shield critical infrastructure from attack. In order to promote stability in cyberspace, a level playing field must be created whereby each state is able to exercise sovereign control over its own digital activities. We therefore emphasize that greater efforts are needed to assist with technology transfer and capacity building initiatives, primarily in the developing world. As we strive to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, restoring and safeguarding trust in public institutions is critical. One may argue that much like the internet, trust is the currency upon which well-functioning societies depend. But trust can only be restored when people feel secure enough to pursue meaningful social and economic relations, including through the internet. We therefore encourage all actors in cyberspace to comply with their international legal obligations for respecting and upholding the principles of sovereignty and political independence in the same manner as they would in the physical domain. Thank you.
I thank the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I now give the floor to the representative of France. Antoine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, thanks for organizing with your co-sponsor this Arria meeting. The current context around the health crisis I showed how much networks and societies are interconnected. They increasingly depend on information and technology means, which brings immeasurable opportunities, but threats and malicious activities continue to intensify, and the situation has become worrying. The protection of critical infrastructure is therefore key for strengthening our common resilience, and this requires measures and responses suited to help build a cyberspace that remains open, free, secure, and stable. And this is why we have launched in November 2018 the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. This call rests on the central need to protect individuals and societies. And properly addressing this objective implies that every member state should have sufficient capabilities to secure its own systems. And we all agree that this should be a priority as regards the protection of health infrastructure, in line with the adoption in 2015 by the GGE of such a norm and subsequent measures. And we need to continue building on existing efforts. And as France is concerned, we have been involved with other EU members in European programs in this regard. At the national level, we have also developed and sometimes clarified our own domestic policies. But protecting critical infrastructures goes beyond national efforts, and everyone in this meeting has said it. It is a matter of trust and cooperation based on a shared understanding of applicable norms. And we need to use the diplomatic international forums to increase mutual understanding, encourage transparency, and develop confidence-building measures to reinforce this trust and cooperation. And to this aim, we need to build on existing international framework, international law, including the UN Charter, international human rights law, and international humanitarian law are fully applicable to cyberspace and must be fully recognized. But our approach should not be overly global. We must build on the complexity of the subject through calibrated discussion. And in that regard, we welcome the resuming of talks at the United Nations and fully support processes in the group of governmental experts and the open-ended working group. We also supported and carried initiatives in the OSCE, the OECD, the G7, and the G20. Lastly, and many have said that before me as well, we cannot only focus on states. Obviously, the cyberspace is a multi-stakeholder space, and we need to develop a multi-stakeholder approach. The digital space is created, dealt with, and used by other actors, citizens, civil society, and private actors. And so engaging collectively with private actors is critical to protect citizens and businesses as appropriate, and to regulate non-state actors' behavior in cyberspace, thereby addressing their role and responsibilities. So we are, in that regard, working with private tech companies to combat the spread of terrorist and violent extremist content online. And we are acting in particular within the G7, the Christchurch Call to Action, the OECD, and the EU. Increasing tensions and threats in cyberspace have very concrete implication on our critical interest. And so cooperation, mutual dialogue, and collective thinking are crucial to ensure the strategic stability and the international security of cyberspace. And this meeting is a good contribution to that goal. And we thank you again for organizing it.
I thank representative of France. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa. Teboho, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. South Africa would like to thank Indonesia as the president of the Security Council, along with the co-sponsors, for convening this meeting. We welcome the briefings by ICRC, OCHA, and UNIDIR. The 2015 GGE norms affirmed in Norm F, G, and H highlight the importance of safeguarding critical infrastructure as an obligation under international law, a domestic responsibility, and a cross-border transnational feature of international cooperation. This event today calls on us to look into humanitarian consequences if states shirk their obligations and responsibilities. South Africa welcomes today's discussion, which allows us to reflect on, amongst others, to what extent are cyber threats different from traditional and non-cyber threats? In addition, we need to engage on the present and future cyber threats against critical infrastructure, and most importantly, establish when such threats pose a risk to international peace and security. South Africa fully supports the enhancements of a dialogue among states to promote the maintenance of international peace and security, and in particular to develop a common understanding of how international law and norms protect critical infrastructure against malicious cyber attacks, as well as to address gaps related to the interaction between various actors and the unique attributes of the ICT environment. My delegation supports the international measures which explicitly protects critical infrastructure and prevent ICT activity contrary to its obligation under international law that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public, and the principles that states should take appropriate measures to protect the critical infrastructure from ICT threats. Furthermore, we believe the persistent and frequent use of cyber operations against member states, which cumulatively cause significant harm and damage and pose risk to international peace and security, and member states should proceed on this path cautiously. In this regard, the Security Council has an important role to play to facilitate prevention of conflict. To this end, South Africa stresses that the UN Charter applies to the cyber activities, especially in view of the UN General Secretary ruling that the UN Charter in its entirety and international law apply in cyberspace. As we did during the July 2020 informal session of the open-ended working group, South Africa reiterates that medical facilities should be considered critical infrastructure and any cyber operations against them should be considered unlawful. The availability and integrity of the internet and critical infrastructure also holds significance in humanitarian assistance delivery as emergency relief efforts are adapting to the ongoing revolution in the ICT environment. We particularly acknowledge the role of ICRC in this discussion, especially given the important call to member states to consider the applicability of international humanitarian law in armed conflict. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Teboho from South Africa. Now I would like to give the floor to the Russian Federation. Ambassador Vasily, you have the floor.
Do you
hear
me, Mr. President?
Yes, yes, I will hear you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Indonesian presidency for its efforts to contribute constructively to the multilateral discussion on international information security. I recognize the presence of our distinguished briefers at this meeting, and I welcome their participation in this debate. The relevance of this topic is unprecedentedly high today. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, almost all communications have been digitalized. Government services, banks, hospitals, schools, as well as other essential institutions now rely on digital infrastructure more than ever. The political, military, terrorist, and criminal threats in this field are also mounting. It is even more regrettable that certain countries are attempting to justify unilateral pressure and sanctions on other member states and even possible use of force against them under the pretext of the, I quote, full and unconditional application of existing international law, in particular humanitarian in information space, end quote. This includes the notorious concept of preventive military cyber strikes, which is based on flawed interpretation of the alleged right to self-defense in cyberspace. We also note with concern a dangerous tendency to artificially differentiate between the norms that should guide the state's behavior in peace times and those that should guide it in an armed conflict. We completely reject these concepts and stand firmly for the use of ICTs for peaceful purposes only. The conflict in information space should be prevented rather than regulated. The role of the UN in this process is unique and indispensable. In this regard, Mr. President, I would like to share with you several points. First of all, we would like to emphasize that currently there is no universal consensus on how international law can be practically applied in the digital field. There is just a very general understanding that it is clearly not a lawless zone. In particular, the UN Charter and the Declaration on Principles of International Law are generally applicable. However, the relevant UN groups of governmental experts argue that since the ICTs are very unique by nature, there is a need to further study how the norms of international law shall apply to their use by states. Moreover, it has been underscored by these groups that given the unique attributes of ICTs, additional norms could be developed over time. This was a hard one and a fragile consensus formula, which should not be questioned. So far, we are not even close to the understanding on the practical application of international law in this field. There are still gaps and loopholes. It is illustrative, for example, that there is no universally agreed qualifier neither for a notion of sovereignty in information space, nor for malicious activity in it, including computer attacks on the information resources of states. As for the international humanitarian law, there is no definition for an armed conflict or aggression in the use of ICTs. It is unclear how the competence and non-competence can be differentiated, or how the principles of distinctions, proportionality, and humanity can be applied. In this regard, we view with concern the attempts to frame national visions on this matter as ready-made guidelines for the international community. Any ultimate judgment on this issue can only be a product of negotiations with the participation of all member states and should enjoy universal consensus. Secondly, the whole set of issues related to the international information security is being discussed now in the relevant UNGA open-ended working group, which is uniquely positioned to address this issue. It is the only inclusive and democratic negotiation mechanism on the international information security in the UN, where all member states can voice their concerns and be a part of decision-making. The priority is to elaborate a comprehensive, attuned to the current realities set of universal rules, norms, and principles of responsible behavior of states in the information space, and to ensure the continuity of the inclusive and transparent dialogue on IIS at the United Nations. The UNGA adopted initial set of such rules on the Russian initiative in 2018. We call on all member states to actively participate in the drafting of the outcome report of the open-ended working group. At the same time, we should not try to prejudge its conclusions, neither in the Council nor anywhere else in the UN. More than that, we see no added value in relaunching from scratch in the Council the discussion of the issues that have already been discussed in depth in relevant governmental groups of experts and open-ended working group. The open-ended working group's leading role on these matters was decided by the member states. In this regard, we believe that it is too early at this stage to implement the proposals of the Secretary General setting the digital roadmap to work on member states' statement of trust and security. Third, the protection of critical infrastructure is extremely important. However, it cannot be separated from a broader goal to adopt the above-mentioned rules of responsible behavior of states. Once they are in place, the states will take up an obligation to refrain from attacks on this infrastructure. It should not be limited to the medical facilities only, but also embrace other essential services, including education, energy sector, transport, finance, etc. Fourth, the open-ended Intergovernmental Committee of Experts initiated by Russia to prepare a comprehensive international convention on countering the use of ICTs for criminal purposes is another important step to enhance international information security. It is critically important to join efforts and contribute constructively to the work of the committee. Fifth, UN-led capacity building efforts aimed at bridging the digital divide are vitally important and should be strongly supported. We hope that the open-ended working group will be able at some point to formulate practical recommendations that will meet the expectations of those in need and will effectively be put into practice. To conclude, Mr. President, I would like to call on all member states to engage constructively in the deliberations of the open-ended working group in order to build joint efforts, a peaceful ICT environment for the common good of future generations. I thank you.
Thanks so much, Vasily, for your statement. Now, I would like to invite the distinguished representative of China, Xiaojun. Xiaojun, China.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Gianni. I appreciate the efforts of Indonesia and other co-hosts to have today's meeting. I also thank the distinguished briefers for their briefing. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, cyber attacks and crimes are surging, and malicious activities using information and communication technology are on the rise. in particular cyber attacks against critical infrastructure in health, telecommunication, water, electricity, energy, and the financial sector. These activities pose grave threat to security and stability of states. Security of critical infrastructure bears on the economic development, social stability, public interest, and the national security of all states, which is the common concern of all parties. As the economy and the society become more dependent on cyber, it is more urgent to protect critical infrastructure. China would like to make the following comments. First, we should uphold peace in cyberspace. Information and communication technology touches every aspect of a state, such as politics, economy, society, and people's lives. Consequences of cyber conflict among states, especially big powers, are beyond imagination. The report of 2015 United Nations Group of Governmental Experts says clearly that a state should not conduct or knowingly support ICT activity contrary to its obligations under international law, and that intentionally damage critical infrastructure. However, some states still give authorization to conduct cyber attacks against critical infrastructure of other states. The practice is dangerous and does not serve the interests of all parties. Second, we should prudently deal with the application of international law in cyberspace. The principles enshrined in the UN Charter apply in cyberspace, including sovereign equality, refraining from the use of force, settlement of dispute through peaceful means, and non-intervention into internal affairs of other states. In terms of applicability of the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, there are still legal and technical difficulties, including definition, scope, and etc. Third, we should develop norms for responsible behavior of states. China supports the development of universally accepted norms within the framework of the UN. States have the rights and responsibilities to protect their critical ICT infrastructure against the threat, interference, attack, and sabotage in accordance with laws. States should be committed to refrain from launching cyber attacks on critical infrastructure of other states. States should not restrict the market access of telecommunication infrastructure products by abusing the concept of national security. Fourth, we should enhance capacity building of states. States should increase exchange on standards and best practices with regard to critical infrastructure protection and explore the possibilities to establish relevant risk early warning and information sharing mechanism. Efforts should also be made to improve protection capability for cyber security of states, especially developing countries, and promote emergency response and coordination in case of cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. I thank you, Ambassador Jenny.
Thanks so much, Zhao Jun, for your statement. And now I would like to invite Tunisia. Ambassador Kais. Kais, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to express our appreciation to the Indonesian presidency and all the co-organizers for convening this timely meeting on the challenges to international peace and security posed by cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. I also want to thank the briefers for their insightful presentations. Mr. President, we have witnessed in recent years increasing cyber attacks against critical infrastructure such as energy facilities, power grids, financial institution, water supply system, healthcare facility. Many of these attacks caused major disruptions, property destruction, and even loss of life. Moreover, cyber attacks on certain critical infrastructure, such as nuclear power plants or dams, could also have large-scale environmental and humanitarian consequences and lead to chaos. Critical infrastructure have become even more vulnerable during the corona pandemic. In particular, more attacks were reported during the pandemic against healthcare facilities at a time when they were under huge pressure and most needed, putting patient life in danger. Such attacks are as unacceptable as unlawful. Mr. President, in 1917, the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2341 on the protection of critical infrastructure from terrorist attacks. This resolution mentioned cybersecurity as part of the protection efforts. It recognized inter alia the growing importance of ensuring reliability and resilience of critical infrastructure and its protection for national security, public safety, and the economy of the concerned states, as well as well-being and welfare of their population, and called upon states to cooperate actively in the prevention, protection, mitigation, preparedness, investigation, response to or recovery from terrorist attacks planned or committed against critical infrastructure. We believe the same protection effort and recommendation could and should apply to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Whoever the perpetrators, terrorists or criminal organization, individual hackers or states. We are indeed concerned by the reported increase of cyber attacks attributed to states against critical infrastructure of other states. More and more countries are developing cyber capabilities for military purposes, which further increases the risk of cyber attacks and conflict. Mr. President, Tunisia reaffirms full support to the conclusion and recommendation of the successive group of governmental experts, unanimously endorsed by the General Assembly, in particular with regard to the applicability of international law in cyberspace. Pending the conclusion of the ongoing discussion as to how to precisely international law should apply in cyberspace, we share the view that urgent and serious efforts should be made to agree on a credible and consensual methodology for attribution of responsibility for cyber attacks. We call in this regard for the continued open and inclusive dialogue on cybersecurity through such platforms as the open-ended working group. In any case, we believe that the existing mechanism for the settlement of disputes, including the Security Council and the ICJ, should be used before resorting to any retaliation measures by a state against another state following a cyber attack. Lastly, and without condoning in any way the militarization of cyberspace nor cyber warfare, we underscore the applicability of international humanitarian law to cyber attacks conducted during armed conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Kais. Now I would like to invite other colleagues to give their statement. And this is based on first come, first serve on the registration. And just to remind that there are quite a large number of colleagues who would like to take the floor. So I would like to appeal to limit their remarks no more than 3 minutes. Do apologize for this. Now I have first on my list is the European Union, Ambassador Silvio. Silvio, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. And the full version of this speech will be shared with through your good offices and published on our website. Mr. President, let me start by thanking Indonesia, together with Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam, for organizing this meeting on an issue which deserves our permanent attention. Cyberspace is increasingly central to our lives, but it is also continuously threatened. There is a clear and concerning rise in cyber threats and malicious cyber activities, including against critical infrastructure, which are conducted both by state and non-state actors, and which has enhanced risk of conflict. Moreover, as the coronavirus pandemic continues, we have observed cyber threats and malicious cyber activities targeting essential operators, which put people's lives at risk. In particular, we have seen a worrisome rise in malicious cyber activities against the healthcare sector, one sector that is absolutely critical for delivering effective national and international responses to COVID-19. Advancing international security and stability is our priority so that everyone can reap the benefits that the internet and the use of technologies provide. Therefore, we have repeatedly signaled our concerns and have condemned and responded to malicious cyber activities with diplomatic means. Mr. President, global resilience is a crucial element to address the challenges associated with the digitalization of our economies and societies, as well as to reduce the misuse of ICTs for malicious purposes. Strong cyber resilience needs a collective and a broad approach. It calls for more robust and effective structures to promote cybersecurity and to respond to cyber attacks. The EU has built up its resilience, boosting capabilities in terms of technologies and also of skills. At the core of this endeavor has been the adoption and full implementation of the Directive on the Security of Network and Information Systems, including the protection of critical infrastructure. The situation, however, calls to effectively promote cybersecurity on the global stage as well. The EU is a staunch supporter of cyber capacity building work and welcomes further engagement in this regard. Such efforts should focus on assisting countries develop the skills and capacities necessary to address cyber threats adequately. To take an example, the EU's Cyber Resilience for Development project promotes the adoption of consistent, actionable national cybersecurity strategies. Mr. President, as European Union, we prioritize international cooperation and dialogue to tackle malicious cyber activities. We believe that respect for international law, in particular international humanitarian law, and the continued work in the United Nations to implement the norms of responsible state behavior are essential to maintaining international security and stability in cyberspace. To this end, the ongoing discussions in the UN on security and stability in cyberspace, including within the existing frameworks such as the Group of Governmental Experts and the Open-Ended Working Group, provide a role for all stakeholders and are a valuable platform to raise awareness, to exchange positions, and to foster a common understanding of the threats and a common approach to them. Secondly, we are committed to demonstrating our willingness to settle international disputes by peaceful means, including in responding to its incidents when appropriate through the framework for a joint EU diplomatic response. The framework constitutes an important step in promoting responsible behavior in cyberspace and signaling the likely consequences of undertaking malicious cyber activities. In this regard, the EU continues to call on states to exercise due diligence, including by not allowing their territory to be used for malicious cyber activities, and to offer cyber capacity building to support states in this endeavor. Mr. President, we live in an interconnected and rapidly changing world. Applying existing international law and upholding UN-agreed rules and norms of responsible state behavior is therefore the sole way we have for handling increasingly complex challenges. Such commitment contributes to a rules-based order, effective multilateralism, and effective global governance, which together help us keep the cyberspace open, stable, and secure. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Silvio. Next on my list, Switzerland, on behalf of the group of Friends of the Protection of Civilians. Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm indeed honored to take the floor on behalf of all of the members of the group of friends on POC, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Dominican Republic, France, Germany, Indonesia, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Liechtenstein, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Sweden, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Uruguay, and my own country, Switzerland. We thank the co-hosts for organizing today's discussion. We also thank today's briefers for their insightful comments. We would like to concentrate on opportunities and challenges with regard to cybersecurity in the humanitarian domain, and in particular, healthcare in armed conflict. These issues are obviously of particular relevance during the pandemic, but cyber attacks on health infrastructures were already a worrying trend before COVID-19 and risk remaining one after the pandemic. We'd like to emphasize that objects indispensable for the survival of the civilian population, which goes well beyond medical infrastructure, are protected by international humanitarian law, IHL, in armed conflict. Already in 1998, this council issued a presidential statement regarding quote, the unacceptability of the destruction of rendering useless of objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, and in particular of using cuts in the electricity and water supply as a weapon against the population, unquote. Healthcare in armed conflict is protected by IHL, and member states recognized in 2015 that international law is applicable in the area of information and communication technology. The Council reaffirmed as well the importance of the protection of the medical mission in its resolution 2286 of 2016. We emphasize that the fundamental value of and obligation of protecting the wounded and sick, medical infrastructure, personnel and transports must be upheld in all circumstances. We also emphasize that malicious cyber operations on medical facilities, as currently experienced throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, can neither in times of peace nor armed conflict be considered acceptable. While technological development have helped to better protect and care for the wounded and sick in armed conflict, we have also witnessed an increase in cyber attacks with consequences for healthcare that go well beyond financial loss and breach of privacy. The trust of the people they serve is the currency of humanitarian organizations. This trust is a precondition for humanitarian action. Therefore, we as member states must create an environment, including a safe information infrastructure that allows for humanitarian organizations to successfully carry out their mandate. The resolution on restoring family links adopted at the 33rd International Conference of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent in 2019 constitutes an important step in this direction. More generally, we call on every state to protect their critical infrastructure and to contribute to the protection of critical infrastructures of all states. Mr. President, allow me to conclude with a few words in my national capacity. Switzerland actively engages the two UN General Assembly processes pertaining to international cyber stability in order to ensure an open, free and secure cyberspace. Both processes provide an important opportunity to drive progress to protect critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activities. Such operations have far-reaching consequences for the population in terms of safety, economic, or public health, but at the same time, they have also aggravated the risk of instability and conflict worldwide and can constitute a threat to international peace and security. We therefore welcome today's informal discussion in the framework of the Security Council. 2 points are particularly important in this context, and I'll stop with that. First, international law applies to the activities of state in cyberspace. This was concluded by a past group of governmental experts, but at the same time, international law provides rules that protect critical infrastructures in times of peace. International humanitarian law also applies to cyber operations in armed conflict, regardless of the legality of such a conflict. IHL, notably its fundamental principles of distinction, proportionality and precaution, impose important limitations for conducting cyber operations in armed conflict, including against critical infrastructure. We must nevertheless foster dialogue among states on how IHL exactly applies to cyberspace. Because also data that has been collected exclusively for humanitarian purposes must be respected and protected. Second, and this is my last point, international cooperation and transparency are key in protecting critical infrastructure. The voluntary norms on responsible behavior of states in cyberspace established by the 2015 group of governmental experts provide guidance to protect critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity. With the Swiss National Cyber Security Center, we have a good example on how to provide technical support to other states in case of an incident and proactively shares data and information about possible threats. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Jonas. Now I would like to give the floor to Denmark, Ambassador Martin. Martin?
Yeah, terima kasih, Pak President. I have the pleasure to speak on behalf of the Nordic countries, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Denmark. Let me begin by saying we are grateful to the Indonesian presidency and the co-host for placing this, I think, very pertinent issue, very pertinent topic on the Council's agenda. I think this allows us to build on the discussions on cyber stability, conflict prevention, and capacity building we had under the Estonian presidency in May this year. Mr. President, as we and many other countries stressed during our cyber discussions in May, the COVID-19 pandemic has underscored just how dependent the world has become on information and communications technology. Not just in the way we communicate with each other, but in the operation of critical infrastructure vital to manage the health crisis. And consequently, a globally accessible, free, open, and secure cyberspace is now more than ever fundamental to how the world operates. Unfortunately, the increase in malicious cyber activity witnessed during the last decade has not slowed with COVID-19. In fact, the year 2020 has revealed that malicious state and non-state actors will take advantage of any opportunity in cyberspace, even a global pandemic. Now, since the beginning of the crisis, we have witnessed significant phishing and malware distribution campaigns, scanning activities, and distributed denial of service attacks targeting institutions working on defeating the pandemic. Some of these malicious cyber activities have even targeted our hospitals. Such deplorable activities endanger the lives of our citizens at a time when these critical sectors are needed most, and they jeopardize our ability to overcome the pandemic as quickly as possible. We condemn this malicious behavior in cyberspace and express our solidarity with all countries that have fallen victim to such activities. We call upon all states to exercise due diligence and take appropriate action against malicious cyber activity originating from other territory. Mr. President, the world has benefited in countless ways from the rapid development in information and telecommunication technology. However, weaknesses in our information and telecommunication systems also make our societies more vulnerable. This is particularly true for our critical infrastructure, where the potential consequences of cyber attacks are enormous. Attacks such as WannaCry and NotPetya not just resulted in vast financial losses, they also affected ICT systems at hospitals and in certain cases struck industrial control systems, crippling electricity supply. Consequently, with these types of attacks being recklessly unleashed, we should consider ourselves lucky we have not seen loss of lives yet. For this reason, upholding a strong cyber resilience throughout our society is crucial, not only to our security, but to the enjoyment of human rights, such as the right to health. This also implies that the international community has a responsibility to assist in capacity building efforts in countries requesting such assistance. But such efforts cannot stand alone. We must aim to raise the cost of malicious cyber activity by collectively holding those responsible to account. We also welcome the efforts by the Secretary General in the area of cyber, new technologies, and digitalization, and wholeheartedly support his agenda moving forward. Once again, we draw attention to the important milestone from the two consensus reports of the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on Developments in the Field of Information and Telecommunications in the context of international security from 2013 and 2015. And with Resolution 17/2337, we agreed in the General Assembly that international law, including the Charter of the United Nations in its entirety, applies to states' behavior in cyberspace, and that the same is true for international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We reiterate that efforts to promote norms and stability in cyberspace must ensure that cybersecurity underpins the protection and promotion of human rights online. Moreover, as a complement to binding international law, the 2015 report by the Group of Governmental Experts formulated 11 voluntary non-binding norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Where international law regulates state behavior, norms guide it. We call for stronger adherence to the norms, of which several are intended to strengthen the protection of critical infrastructure. And we draw particular attention to the norm emphasizing that a state should not conduct or knowingly support ICT activity contrary to its obligations under international law that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public. In conclusion, Mr. President, we stress that any cyber attack attempting to hamper the ability of civilian critical infrastructure vital to manage health crises is in clear violation of international law and goes against the very spirit of the agreed voluntary non-binding norms. It is therefore unacceptable. All states have an important role to play in promoting and upholding a rules-based, predictable, open, free, and secure cyberspace. I thank you, Mr. President.
Terima kasih, Pak Martin. Thank you so much. Now I would like to give the floor to Canada. Richard.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm taking the floor today on behalf of Australia, New Zealand, and my own country, Canada. Let me thank you and the other co-hosts for organizing this meeting, and let me thank the briefers for broadening our perspectives with their insights. As almost everybody has noted, the entrenchment of the pandemic, with the entrenchment of the pandemic, our interconnected world's reliance on digital technologies and the internet has increased exponentially. Unfortunately, we've also witnessed an increase in malicious cyber activity affecting critical infrastructure. The healthcare sector in particular has been targeted for financial or strategic purposes by state and non-state actors seeking to take advantage of the unique vulnerabilities brought about by the COVID-19 crisis. Cyber activities affecting critical infrastructure pose a threat not only to security, but also to economic development and livelihoods, and ultimately to the safety and well-being of individuals. Their differentiated impact on women and girls requires further study. For Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, this challenge can be addressed by improving domestic resilience to malicious cyber activity and enhancing responsible state behavior in cyberspace. The framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace is the foundation on which peace and stability in this space rests. It is grounded in international law, which applies in cyberspace, and in the voluntary norms of responsible state behavior adopted by the UN Group of Governmental Experts, or GGE, in 2015, and endorsed through Resolution 70/237. The framework recommends countries cooperate to prevent criminal use of ICTs and prohibits the use of proxies. Additionally, 2 of the agreed norms specifically address critical infrastructure. The first one indicates that no state should conduct or knowingly support ICT activity contrary to its obligations under international law that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public. Malicious cyber activities that damage or impair critical infrastructure can constitute internationally wrongful acts or, in extreme cases, the unlawful use of force under international law. International law provides constraints on state behavior in cyberspace, but it also sets out how states can respond to internationally wrongful acts, whether through countermeasures or exceptionally in self-defense. The Security Council can also authorize or require measures under Chapter 7 of the Charter to respond to malicious cyber activity against critical infrastructure where it constitutes a threat to international peace and security. The second norm specifies that states should take appropriate measures to protect their critical infrastructure from ICT threats. In this respect, our countries have committed to acting in accordance with the norms and have put in place measures aimed at critical infrastructure operators in order to raise awareness of cyber resilience and improve cyber security postures. We have also made concrete suggestions in the form of guidance texts at the open-ended working group on ICTs and international security to further support the implementation of the agreed norms. These include those dealing with critical infrastructure and a specific proposal to protect health infrastructure. We have also shared detailed overviews of domestic efforts to implement these norms so as to facilitate voluntary information exchanges on national approaches. Capacity building efforts are also vital as they increase the resilience of states to malicious cyber activity. Combined, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand have contributed over $83 million to cyber capacity building projects around the world. To conclude, international law and the agreed 2015 GGE norms guide state behavior in cyberspace, including with respect to the responsibilities of states concerning critical infrastructure. The dissemination, operationalization, and implementation of these responsibilities would go a long way in helping to build national resilience and mitigating the risks to international peace and security emanating from cyberspace. Je vous remercie. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Richard. Now I would like to give the floor to Egypt. Ambassador, Brother Muhammad Idris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by expressing our thanks and appreciation to the Indonesian Presidency of Security Council for August and to the co-hosts and the distinguished briefers. Egypt attaches great importance to the international security aspects of information and technological and telecommunication technologies, and strongly calls for a central and leading role by the United Nations through an inclusive and equitable process with the participation of all states in promoting and developing rules and the principles for the responsible use of ICTs by states. A number of states are developing ICT capabilities for possible malicious uses and offensive purposes. The possible use of ICTs in future conflicts between states is becoming a reality, and the risk of harmful ICT attacks against critical infrastructure is both real and serious. Furthermore, the relevant technologies developed by states are being transferred, copied, or reproduced by terrorists and criminals. The malicious use of ICTs by terrorist and criminal organizations is a serious threat to international peace and security, especially in light of the attribution-related challenges. There is no doubt that the international security aspects of ICTs have become too important and strategic to be left without clear binding rules at the international level. An inclusive process within the UN system is the best and most efficient way to establish arrangements that are equitable, comprehensive, and effective in its domain. Mr. President, the UN has already made several attempts to formulate the elements of a framework for conflict prevention and stability in cyberspace. The General Assembly called on member states to be guided in the use of ICTs by the norms of responsible state behavior contained in the consecutive reports of the groups of governmental experts under the first committee. However, the implementation of these modest norms remains quite minimal at best, namely due to their voluntary nature and the lack of any follow-up mechanism. The ongoing discussions in the context of the open-ended working group, which is the first inclusive process established by the first committee of the GA on this important topic, are making promising progress towards a possible agreement on important mutual understandings among member states on a number of key aspects. Among the proposals put forward by Egypt to the OEWG was a recommendation on a binding commitment by all member states to refrain from any act that knowingly or intentionally damages or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical civilian infrastructure under any circumstances. Mr. President, the recommendations which have been endorsed by the GA by consensus can form the basis for politically or legally binding rules, especially that they are driven from the principles of international law and the UN Charter. Egypt has also encouraged the consideration of the establishment of an inclusive institutional platform dedicated to international cooperation on safeguarding the peaceful uses of ICTs and mitigating their associated risks. While we consider that international law and the principles of the Charter do apply to all domains, including cyberspace, we believe that there is a pressing need to identifying specific obligations that make state behavior consistent with international law in cyberspace. Mr. President, in an increasingly connected world, any international regime on cybersecurity will be only strong at its weakest link. Fortunately, there is a global consensus that capacity building efforts should increase to prevent potential attacks against critical infrastructure and to develop the policy and technical skills needed to secure the digital economy. The UN led a coordinated effort towards the provision of relevant assistance and capacity building, especially for developing countries. In conclusion, Mr. President, ICTs offer both massive opportunities and challenges, and we underscore that there is a pressing need to identify and develop rules for responsible state behavior to increase stability and security in the global ICT environment and to prevent cyberspace from becoming another arena for conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Idris. Now I would like to invite Equatorial Guinea Ambassador Anatolio. It seems that we lost at Equatorial Guinea. Maybe we should move first to Italy. Italy, Maurizio.
Mr. President, thank you for organizing this important and timely meeting. Italy strongly commends the Indonesian presidency as well as the permanent missions of Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam for this initiative. And while aligning itself to the statement delivered by the European Union, wishes to make some additional remarks in its national capacity. Mr. President, cyber attacks by state and non-state actors are on the rise. Critical infrastructures and essential services are increasingly at risk of malicious activities. Urgent action is therefore needed to tackle these threats and to ensure the stability of cyberspace. We praise the members of the Security Council for their continuing attention to this matter. In our view, cybersecurity cannot be addressed separately from old and emerging threats to world stability and peace. We strongly praise the work carried out by the OEWG on cybersecurity and by its chair, and we sincerely hope it will conclude its mandate with a positive, relevant outcome. Mr. President, increasing global resilience, especially in times of pandemics, is crucial for cybersecurity. Within the EU, Italy supports a range of programs and initiatives to assist countries in developing the capabilities to address cyber incidents, whether through direct engagement, bilateral contacts, or engagement through regional and multilateral institutions. In order to enable all states to properly face the above-mentioned threats, we must ensure that those who operate essential services and critical infrastructures are protected from hacking and other cyber risks. In this respect, we stress the need to ensure higher coherence and coordination in the various capacity-building initiatives taking place at the regional, sub-regional, and bilateral level. We feel that the UN can play a significant role in this matter by developing, in agreement with member states and regional organizations, a systematic monitoring, reporting, and verification system. The UN could also support the regional organizations and member states in setting up short and long-term goals, as well as in defining the purpose and principle of the capacity building initiatives. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by recalling that 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security. We feel that we should collectively devise strategies to make sure that the SDG number 5 is also pursued with a view to bridging the gender-digital divide, to enabling women to be actors of cyber stability, and to mitigating the consequences they suffer from malicious activities in cyberspace. I thank you.
Thank you, Mauritius. Next on my list, Morocco. Ambassador Kadiri, Omar.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I wish to strongly commend you, Mr. President, for convening this most timely and relevant virtual area formula meeting. And I would also like to thank you and congratulate you for your presidency of the Security Council. Very successful presidency. We also thank the co-organizers of this meeting, Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the ICRC, as well as all the briefers. Mr. President, the world has been steadily and quickly propelled into the cybernetic era, particularly in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic, throughout which our global reliance on and use of ICTs have reached an all-time high. This proves the nodal role of cyberspace in our modern daily lives in ensuring worldwide connectivity and business continuity everywhere, and thus in maintaining global stability. However, as our reliance on cyber means have grown exponentially and irreversibly every day, so is also the potential for the rise of cyber attacks, including those targeting critical infrastructures. Regrettably, the international community has witnessed the deplorable consequences of cyber attacks and of the misuse of ICTs when carried out against critical infrastructures, which are also characterized by their high vulnerability and interdependency, especially in the times of COVID-19. Such malicious and condemnable acts can result in impeding humanitarian assistance and emergency relief, as well as causing human harm. It is only by collectively and individually endeavoring to prevent the misuse of ICTs that we can make sure the cyberspace will continue to serve as a driver for peace, security, and development. The protection of critical infrastructures begin with the identification of the systems to be protected, in addition to the designation of critical sectors. I wish to draw the attention to the primary responsibility that states carry in terms of national security as a starting point for global stability and cyber prevention. Abiding by common international norms with regards to responsible state behavior in the cyberspace is fundamental and a real confidence building measure. I wish to stress that there is, within the UN, a consensus on the applicability of international law to cyberspace, particularly after the endorsement of 3 consensus GGE reports by the UN General Assembly in 2010, 2013, and 2015. The Kingdom of Morocco attached early on a very particular interest to the development of information and communication technologies and to their benefits as a driver for development. This is why Morocco, parallel to improving its national cyber capacity, joined several international initiatives, including the 2018 Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, and fully participates and contributes currently in the Group of Governmental Experts, GGE, the Open-Ended Working Group, OEWG, and the UN Group of Friends on E-Governance and Cybersecurity that Estonia is co-chairing with Singapore. The issue of capacity building to increase cyber resilience also lies at the heart of the outreach activities led by Morocco, such as experience and expertise sharing with fellow African countries, including through a dedicated bilateral, regional, and South-South cooperation. To conclude, Mr. President, Morocco stresses that it is the member states' shared responsibility, individually and through international cooperation, to show a common resolve to protect sensitive and critical infrastructures in strategic sectors such as health, IT, logistics, energy, etc., as it would constitute a fundamental basis for the development of confidence building measures between states. Member states would greatly gain from experience sharing and forging a common understanding on trends in cyber attacks and international best practices to better understand, prevent, and address these new emerging threats. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Brother Omar. Next, I would like to invite Brazil, Ambassador João.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Just for the record, Brazil associates itself to the statement delivered by Switzerland on behalf of the Group of Friends on Protection of Civilians. On my national capacity, I thank Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam, as well as the ICRC for convening this meeting. I also thank the briefers for their availability and the expertise shared. Mr. President, in previous occasions, when the matter of cybersecurity was addressed before this Council under Arria formula, my delegation stated clearly that it would be inappropriate for the Council to seek to create new norms in the cybersecurity realm, and that the Council should be guided first and foremost by the objective of promoting adherence to past and future recommendations adopted by the UN General Assembly on cybersecurity. We affirmed that view then, and we reaffirm it now. As any other human domain, cyberspace ought to be subject to law. The UN General Assembly unanimously endorsed 3 consensus reports adopted by the groups of governmental experts, which stated clearly that international law, in particular the UN Charter, applies to cyberspace. The reports also affirmed the applicability in cyberspace of the key principles of international humanitarian law: humanity, necessity, proportionality, and distinction. Moreover, the reports put forward a set of norms, rules, and principles for responsible states' behavior in cyberspace. In accordance with such rules, states should not conduct or knowingly support ICT activity contrary to its obligations under international law that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public. Brazil believes that both the OEWG and the current GGE could contribute to this architecture of norms, rules, and principles on cybersecurity by defining a clearer way that constitutes critical of what constitutes critical infrastructure for the purpose of such legal protections against cyber attacks. The preamble of Resolution 58/199 of 2004 offers a non-exhaustive list of critical information infrastructures. In addition, Brazil underscores that the public core of the Internet should also be protected from cyber attacks. Furthermore, my delegation underlines that electoral processes are also particularly vulnerable to interference through the malicious use of ICTs. Given their crucial importance for the legitimacy of democratic domestic political systems, Brazil believes that such electoral process and their IT footprint should also be considered an essential component of the critical infrastructure of states. Mr. President, once again, I thank the organizers of this Arria Formula meeting, and I reiterate Brazil's firm and constructive engagement regarding the issue of cybersecurity. I thank you for your attention.
Obrigado, Brazil. Now I give the floor to Netherlands. Ambassador Mark.
Terima kasih, Mr. President. Thank you for organizing this meeting. Also, of course, to Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and thanks to all the excellent briefings we heard earlier. Mr. President, COVID-19 has shown us how much digital systems have evolved and have become part of our lives. On the one hand, a blessing, from kids being able to continue school virtually to us having this briefing today and this meeting. On the other hand, it highlights the vulnerability of our societies for potentially vast disruptions caused by cyber attacks. Especially now, we need to work together to create a more reliable, secure, and trusted digital environment. Improved capacity building and strengthening of the existing international normative framework and its implementations are key. And both areas are clear priorities of my government. Mr. President, on the normative framework and its implementation. Since the pandemic started, we have seen an enormous increase in cyber attacks by state and non-state actors alike. The cyber operations against the healthcare sector are particularly appalling, and we have explicitly proposed to consider the healthcare sector as critical infrastructure in the open-ended working group on cybersecurity. On a similar footing, we consider the public core of the internet, as well as the technical infrastructure for elections, to be covered by the existing GGE norm of not attacking critical infrastructure. The growing support for these ideas in the open-ended working group is a hopeful sign of our ability to build towards a norms-based cyberspace. And we also encourage states to publicly define and share what they consider to be critical infrastructure. This way, we can increase transparency, develop common understanding, build confidence, and create predictability. We endorse a statement of the Freedom Online Coalition and underline the importance for states to respect human rights and the right to privacy, both off and online. Mr. President, on the capacity building, digital resilience is key to manage cyber risk and mitigate their impact. And the inclusion of multiple stakeholders helps to raise awareness, share expertise, and build support for cybersecurity measures. However, different levels of capacity of ICT security amongst different states amplify vulnerability in our interconnected world. So it is in our common interest to engage in capacity building efforts. Moreover, by harnessing the power of information and communications technologies, better progress across the 70 SDGs can be achieved, particularly on goals 9 and 10. In that light, the Netherlands established a global forum on cyber expertise, which has matured into a strong public-private capacity building foundation. In the same vein, we support the digital development partnership of the World Bank, especially in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. And we engage in regular outreach discussions, such as the Global Cyber Policies Dialogues, organized by the East-West Institute. Mr. President, to conclude, thank you again for organizing this Arria meeting, and we applaud your efforts to raise awareness and address the vulnerability of critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. Thank you.
Bedankt, thank you, Mark. Now I would like to invite Lebanon, Amal, Ambassador Amal. Are you with us? I don't see her. Next, I would like to invite Liechtenstein. Ambassador Christian.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Johnny, it's wonderful to see you. And thank you for organizing this very important discussion that has been very productive. I also want to thank the excellent briefers that have joined us today. In recent years, we have seen evidence of cyber attacks against forms of critical infrastructure, including telecommunications networks, power grids, the judicial system, and healthcare facilities. In targeting vaccine development programs, cyber operations threaten to undermine the global response to COVID-19, and ongoing attempts to influence elections through cyber operations are aimed to undermine democratic norms. This organization must have a key role in preventing states and other actors to move the domain of warfare to cyberspace with little consequence. Indeed, it seems obvious that cyber attacks against critical infrastructure can amount to threats to international peace and security and constitute acts of aggression. As we have heard repeatedly during this conversation, there is a strong consensus that international law does apply to cyberspace. There is, however, no such agreement on how that application functions in practice. Against this background, we have taken it upon ourselves, together with a number of other states, to help develop a clearer understanding how one set of international law applies in the cyber context, and that is the law reflected in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. We are, of course, aware that this is not a treaty that is universally ratified. Your country and others in this meeting have not yet joined the Rome Statute. However, that is of limited relevance for our conversation today, because the law reflected in the Rome Statute is in essence drawn from existing international law. So we are convinced that this effort can make a very important contribution to this conversation. It can also help inform the work of this council, in particular how to use its power to refer situations involving acts of aggression to the International Criminal Court, a referral power that provides an important complement and enforcement mechanism for the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force. It can both serve as an important deterrent to malicious cyber operations and contribute to accountability for acts of cyber aggression. We have, together with our partners in Belgium, has mentioned this effort in this meeting before, begun to explore the role that the ICC may play in the regulation of warfare as it evolves in the 21st century by creating a Council of Advisors on the application of the Rome Statute to cyber warfare. We have convened a group of legal and technical experts to discuss the extent to which the law reflected in that treaty and the provisions defining the crimes over which the court has jurisdiction apply to cyber attack. We are keenly aware to continue the discussions with all states, including those who have so far chosen to remain outside the Rome Statute. A final report based on the views of the experts is scheduled to be presented at the ICC Assembly of State Parties in this coming December. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thanks so much, Christian, and stay healthy. Next on my list, Japan, Ambassador Kimihiro-san.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, first I would like to thank Indonesia, Belgium, and Estonia and Vietnam for organizing this very important Arria Formula meeting. Well, today's topic is more relevant than ever. COVID-19 has undoubtedly increased people's reliance on information and communication technology and accentuated the risk of malicious use of ICTs. COVID-19 brought to light that cyber attack against critical infrastructure, in particular those targeting medical institutions and authorities, is a real threat to human security and could harm the survival, livelihood, and dignity of people and disrupt peaceful societies.
Well, Japan will not condone any cyber attacks and the malicious cyber activities that try to take advantage of the ongoing human security crisis caused by COVID-19. All of us need to work to ensure the safety and stability of the cyber domain. Vigilant adherence to existing rules, including international law and voluntary norms, is crucial for upholding an accessible, open, interoperable, reliable, and secure cyberspace. All UN member states agree that existing international law, including the UN Charter in its entirety, applies to cyberspace. And this shared recognition should be the starting point in deterring cyber attacks, including those targeting critical infrastructure. Norms of responsible states' behavior in cyberspace also play an indispensable role, complementing the application of existing international law. All UN member states, by adopting relevant General Assembly resolution by consensus, have accepted 11 norms regarding responsible state behavior proposed by the group of government experts in 2015. Therefore, these norms need to be respected. Japan co-sponsored a joint proposal at the open-ended working group that provides guidance for refraining and preventing any cyber attacks against medical services and medical facilities regarded as critical infrastructure for the purpose of norms agreed in 2015. In light of the persistent challenge of COVID-19, we sincerely hope this proposal would contribute to enhancing the protection of medical infrastructure that are of critical importance in a collective fight against the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimihiro-san. Now I would like to invite Ireland. Ambassador Brian.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the missions of Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam for organizing today's important discussion. And thank you also to the briefers for their really interesting and useful presentation. Today's meeting is an opportunity both for the wider UN membership to have a meaningful exchange on this crucial topic, as well as for the Security Council to increase its knowledge and expertise related to the threats posed by cyber attacks. As others have said, Mr. President, the pandemic has increased our reliance on cyber and information and communication technologies to maintain critical infrastructure, including to protect our citizens and to sustain our economies. But at the same time, it has also highlighted the vulnerabilities of this key infrastructure to malicious cyber activity. Ireland and our EU partners have condemned recent attacks against critical infrastructure, particularly those directed against medical facilities during the pandemic. These attacks endanger lives, erode trust, and threaten peace and security, escalating the risk of international conflict. Protecting this infrastructure starts at home. In Ireland, we have taken measures to support infrastructure operators and have introduced laws to strengthen the resilience of key infrastructure. We firmly believe that strong and sustained engagement with non-governmental stakeholders is essential to tackle vulnerabilities and to detect and respond to attacks. Ireland is also working closely with its EU partners to enhance critical infrastructure resilience and welcomes the progress made by the OSCE and other regional organizations in promoting confidence building measures that help reduce the risk of conflict arising from misuse of ICTs. But critical infrastructure is made up of globally interconnected systems, and states typically only exercise control over the portion of this network in their territories. The UN is well placed to decisively lead on a global approach to ICTs and cyber and their impact across the UN agenda. The UN Charter, international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, provide the foundations to promote in cyberspace. The General Assembly has already agreed by consensus that states should be guided in their use of ICTs by 2015, or by the 2015 report on the UN Group of Governmental Experts, which delineated 11 norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, including the protection of critical infrastructure. Ireland has joined many other states at the recent UN open-ended working group on ICTs in calling for the inclusion of healthcare as a critical infrastructure under these norms. We will also continue to call for the swift implementation and operationalization of the norms, and at the same time support capacity building measures to strengthen cyber resilience globally, particularly in relation to critical infrastructure, and to ensure that the ICTs and cyber contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. Ireland remains committed at home through our recently published National Cybersecurity Strategy and internationally to ensuring that states facilitated by the UN take the necessary steps to promote a free, open, peaceful, safe and secure global cyberspace, including through building critical infrastructure, resilience and protection. Thank you again, Mr. President, and to the organisers of today's important debate.
Thank you, thank you, Brian. Now I would like to give the floor to Ukraine. Mr. Yuri Vitrenko. Yuri, are you there?
Right, I'm here.
Yes,
Mr. President. Thank you very much. I thank organizers for holding this timely meeting. For Ukraine, who championed the first ever Security Council resolution on protection of critical infrastructure, 2341, adopted unanimously 3 years ago, today's topic is quite close to our heart. Our appreciation also goes to the briefers. Unprecedentedly rapid development of IT technologies led to the significant expansion and further reformatting of cyberspace. Nowadays, it is no longer just a comfortable platform for communication or facilitating economic development, but also means of warfare in hands of criminals, terrorists, and some state actors. Unfortunately, despite the legal norms and institutional mechanisms established to combat cyber crimes on national and international levels, the advantages of modern digital world are too often being abused, with cyber attacks on the rise worldwide. For example, from the beginning of this year alone, over 300 cyber incidents on the critical infrastructure facilities were detected in Ukraine. Most of those attacks were carried out by hackers groups from the Russian Federation. Mr. Chair, there is a close linkage between a cyber and information security. We are witnessing and in many cases experiencing the devastating consequences of both cyber attacks and polluted information environments filled with disinformation, manipulation, and other viral and extreme content. In this context, Ukraine supports the work of the relevant group of governmental experts who produce the rules of responsible behavior of states in cyberspace. Yet, not only critical infrastructure, but international politics are becoming progressively vulnerable to cyber threats, as seen from interference into major election campaigns by Russian hackers. In January this year, the UN IT system in Europe have become a target of massive attack. All in all, a number of serious cyber incidents continue to grow, targeting almost each and every area of everyday life. Amidst the COVID-19 outbreak, a surge of attacks against healthcare providers, medical laboratories, and pharmaceutical manufacturers was reported in a number of countries. Therefore, cybersecurity has become a critical component of ensuring wide peace and security, which requires strict adherence to international law, as well as strengthening cooperation amongst all stakeholders, member states, international organizations, private sector, and civil society. The particular emphasis should be placed on the elaboration of unified standards in combating cyber threats, sharing best practices, building mutual trust in the field of cybersecurity, preventing the use of cyberspace for terrorist and military purposes, as well as providing technical assistance to enhance national capacities to withstand cyber threats and mitigate the risks. Of no less importance is to double down on the spread of propaganda and fake news, including through ensuring accountability for such actions. Mr. President, cyber attacks against critical infrastructure and governmental agencies, as well as disinformation campaigns that may incite terrorism, have become a widely used method of interference into internal affairs of sovereign states, including Ukraine. We strongly encourage the international community to thoroughly consider the issue of accountability in cases of identification of a particular state or state actors behind preparation or exercising targeted malicious cyber attacks or dissemination of lies for hostile purposes. After all efforts aimed at ensuring cybersecurity will be in vain without reliable mechanisms of bringing perpetrators of such crimes to justice. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Now I would like to invite Chile, Mr. Francisco Divya.
Yes, thanks a lot, President. And all, we are very appreciate the possibility to stay here. As Chile has stated before, cyber attacks against critical infrastructure are a serious threat against states. We condemn these attacks, especially those that have been carried out against hospital and health facilities. In order to face this threat, the government of Chile is currently working on a bill on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. The government of Chile reaffirms position that international law, and in particular the Charter of the United Nations, is applicable and essential to maintain peace and stability and to promote an open, secure, stable, accessible, and peaceful ICT environment. In this regard, Chile strongly supports the work of the open-ended working group on developments in the field of information and telecommunications in the context of international security. And in particular, the group of governmental expert GGE, its reports and recommendations adopted in 2010, 2013, and 2015. These reports and its recommendations constitute an important basis of understanding on the role played by international law, norms, and confidence-building measures in the field of ICT. In fact, in order to reduce the malicious use of cyber capabilities and to build a more stable cyberspace, it is crucial to respect and to implement these recommendations at all levels. Therefore, we welcome and support the initiative of Australia and Mexico for the establishment of a national survey of implementation of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1770/237. We would also like to share some ideas considering the guiding questions of the concept note. At the regional level, states will work together in order to develop specific strategies for the implementation of norms pertaining the protection of critical infrastructure, especially the 11 norms identified in 2015 GGE report. States should cooperate in developing strategies for capacity building related to the implementation of agreed norms and to develop of confidence building measures. Third, states should continue working together at the regional level with the aim of developing and implementing confidence building measures, which are an essential tool in promoting cooperation and trust in cyberspace. In addition, it is important to promote dialogue across regions regarding this matter. It is important also that the states promote and strengthen cyber diplomacy. Ministry of Foreign Affairs play an important role in advancing a common understanding of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Therefore, cyber diplomacy is fundamental for the implementation of norms, confidence building measures, and for strengthening international law and cyberspace. Finally, yet importantly, hospitals and the health sector should be considered as a critical infrastructure, as be off limits, as well as the core of the internet. Thanks a lot, President.
Muchas gracias. Now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Turkey, Bilge. Ms. Bilge, you have the floor. Turkey.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like to thank Indonesia for organizing this Arria Formula meeting on a pertinent subject and at a critical time. Our appreciation also goes to the co-organizers of this meeting as well as the distinguished briefers today. With the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, we have rediscovered the essential role the information and communication technologies play in our lives. The pandemic has changed our lives dramatically, but with the help of ICTs, we were able to adapt ourselves to the new realities. E-trade, remote access, and video conference applications, as well as other ICT tools, provided the basis for remote working and online education during this challenging period. The pandemic has also highlighted our vulnerabilities in the face of malicious use of ICTs and cyber attacks. While we all struggle to adapt to the new normal, we also had to focus on securing the critical infrastructure. Unfortunately, cyber threats are constantly increasing in number, complexity, and severity, especially in vital sectors such as health, telecommunications, finance, and energy. These threats risk having destabilizing effects to the level of threatening international peace and security. Turkey's institutions have detected increased number of vulnerabilities with the COVID outbreak, especially due to the remote working methods. Cyber threats targeting critical infrastructure, such as coronavirus-related malware and phishing attacks, have been remarkable during this period. This has also reaffirmed the relevance of one of the strategic pillars of our national cybersecurity and action plan, which is strengthening cyber defense and protection of critical infrastructure. Mr. President, Turkey is concerned about the potential human cost of cyber operations on critical civilian infrastructure, including health infrastructure. The malicious cyber operations targeting healthcare facilities in some countries during the pandemic have amplified our existing concerns. For this reason, we need to increase our efforts to promote responsible state behavior in cyberspace. The existing dialogue and cooperation structures under the UN are extremely significant vehicles for this purpose. It is equally important to include all the relevant stakeholders in such a dialogue. Turkey supports the applicability of international law, particularly the UN Charter in cyberspace. We can build on the previous work undertaken within the UN system and find ways to better implement rules, norms, and principles for responsible state behavior. There is also a need to create a common understanding on cyber threats. We hope we will make progress in producing tangible periods in the coming period. While rules and norms are crucial, they do not in and of themselves protect critical infrastructure. Capacity building efforts need to be strengthened as well for effective implementation. In this context, the UN and regional organizations can promote exchange programs for cybersecurity experts and establish common training platforms. In addition, we believe that international exercises must be encouraged in order to enhance national cyber incident preparedness and response capacities. Turkey will continue to engage in and contribute to discussions on cybersecurity, and we would like to thank you once again for organizing this timely meeting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Birch. Now I would like to invite El Salvador. Ambassador Lopez, agree? You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And dear friend, I would like to thank Indonesia and the co-host for organizing this Arria Formula meeting. We express our appreciation to the briefers for their presentation, which allow us to have a more comprehensive view of these great challenges. Mr. President, the development of new technologies represents a significant opportunity to promote economic and social development of states. However, such information systems are vulnerable to attacks by people who try to manipulate these communication networks for ideological purposes or for their benefit. Since criminals and terrorists are exploiting new technologies, efforts and resources must be invested to work on specialized guidelines for the development and implementation of common rules that help us to prevent this type of crime and bring justice to those who are outside of it. We welcome the efforts undertaken by the UN member states in the area of terrorism within the international peace and security agenda. However, we know that the binding international instruments on the subject of terrorism it is not yet possible to find direct mention of cyberspace, cyberspace information and communication technologies, or states' responsibilities for activities on the internet. And this is a gap we all should close as soon as possible. We welcome the efforts of the Security Council to discuss these major threats in a substantive manner and with a view to offering effective solutions. We urge this UN organ to continue these important discussions, leaving aside any political or particular interest. We recall the GA Resolution 58/199, which includes a list of the components of critical infrastructure of the state, which, due to the increase in technological interdependence, are exposed to a growing number and a wider variety of threats. This resolution also recognizes that critical infrastructure vulnerabilities continue to pose significant security problems. Furthermore, in order to create conditions for progress towards the common objective of international peace and security, the full exercise of human rights, and economic and social development, we believe that the framework provided by the Resolution 58/199 should be expanded to address the need to preserve activities of critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, in addition to the current efforts to prevent the cyberspace from becoming a propaganda platform for radicalization, recruitment, and criminal fundraising. Given the great importance of legitimizing and strengthening national political systems, the promotion of democracy, the fundamental rights and liberties, and the rule of law, El Salvador considers that electoral system and its processes must be included as a component of critical infrastructure of states, in light of their vulnerability to interference through the malicious use of ICTs, which put at high risk the stability of countries and regions around the world. We're currently facing one of the greatest challenges since the creation of this organization. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the growing need to focus on the attacks on health infrastructure and disinformation, which are issues of concern to my country because these put the lives of people at risk and they directly impact the most vulnerable populations. Mr. President, we would like to emphasize the importance of working on the basis of consensus without the intention of imposing solutions that are not compatible with the reality of states, as well as to ensure the progress made by the GA through the first committee will not be overlooked. I would like to conclude my intervention by highlighting the important role of regional organizations, the private sector, civil society, think tanks, and other relevant actors to prevent and combat these threats, as mentioned by the ICRC. El Salvador expresses the urgency of continue working to strengthen regional and international cooperation mechanisms to prevent and combat these challenges through a dynamic exchange of information and good practices, capacity building, standardizing legal frameworks, and using new technologies as a vehicle for development and to combat organized crime. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias. I agree. Next on my list, Costa Rica. Ambassador Maritza.
Thank you, Mr. President. Costa Rica would like to express its appreciation to Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam, as well as the International Committee of the Red Cross for organizing this event. And we thank the speakers for their insightful remarks. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure included those in the fields of energy, food, and water supply, telecommunications, transportation, and healthcare are on the rise. As we state our firm condemnation of attacks on critical infrastructure in the physical realm, in particular healthcare infrastructure, we must not tolerate such attacks in cyberspace. Against this backdrop, Costa Rica welcomes today's discussion, and we would like to focus on the following topics. Firstly, the healthcare sector, from medical record keeping to patient care, is especially susceptible to cyber intrusions. The recent increase in cyber operations against healthcare facilities is not only unlawful, but completely unacceptable, particularly in the midst of the ongoing pandemic. Thus, we must take immediate and decisive action to prevent and stop cyber attacks that target hospitals, healthcare, and research organizations. We can do so by working with competent authorities and experts in cybersecurity in their respective countries and to collaborate internationally in order to anticipate and defend against such attacks. Secondly, the protection of medical facilities during armed conflict lies at the heart of the international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions are clear. Medical facilities and their staff must be respected and protected. Belligerents must not harm medical infrastructure, including through cyber operations, and must take great caution to avoid incidental harm caused by such operations. This area formula is therefore an opportunity to reaffirm and recommit to the international rules that prohibit such actions, as well as the cybersecurity measures which take such provisions actionable. Lastly, it's essential to implement a global security strategy. A key element of the global cybersecurity strategy is cultivating inclusive partnerships with the private sector, non-governmental organizations, and academia, not only in the framework of the ICTs in the context of international security, but also on broader issues of digital access taken up by the United Nations. In this regard, the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation will offer states and all other stakeholders the opportunity to continue to actively engage with the UN on cybersecurity implementation. Mr. President, in our region, Latin America and Caribbean states have grasped the magnitude of our security cyber challenges. As President of the Latin America and the Caribbean E-Government Network, Costa Rica promotes the creation of a cybersecurity working group to strengthen the capacity of the region in this field. We also affirm what the Secretary General has said regarding the need to overcome the digital, social, and political divides in cyberspace in order to achieve one world, one net, one vision. Thus, security and access challenges must be addressed in tandem by this Council and by all member states. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Maritza. Next, Malaysia. Ambassador Dato' Syed.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to thank Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, and Vietnam for convening this Arria Formula meeting. The chosen topic of cyber attacks against critical infrastructure is especially timely, given the looming cyber threats in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I also wish to thank the briefers for their insightful presentations. Our shared experience from the recent global pandemic suggests possible negative trends in the digital domain that could undermine international security and stability. There is no doubt of the growing exploitation of ICTs for malicious purposes in every sector and society, which increases in frequency, precision, and sophistication. Indeed, existing vulnerabilities are amplified in times of crisis. Attacks on critical infrastructure and critical information infrastructure constitute a threat not only to our security, but also to economic developments and livelihoods, and eventually the safety and well-being of individuals. Attacks on essential services to the public, such as medical facilities, financial system, energy, water, and sanitation infrastructures are deplorable. As no state is shielded from these threats, it is pertinent that member states develop cooperative measures through multilateral platforms to address such threats. Any such collaboration should involve the private sector, civil society, and academia. Malaysia remains of the view that the endeavor of norm setting for cybersecurity should continue to be the task of the two parallel tracks established by the General Assembly, namely the open-ended working group as well as the group of governmental experts. While previous GGEs successfully produced consensus reports, the OEWG is particularly unique in its inclusive nature, which allows all UN member states to share views and perspectives on the matter. An inclusive process within the UN system is the best and most efficient way to establish arrangements that are equitable, comprehensive, and effective in the cyber domain. Moving forward, we hope that the established platforms of the First Committee, OEWG, and GGE under the ambit of the UN General Assembly
would continue to be utilized, through which member states could constructively engage on various pertinent aspects that include norm settings, principles, rules, as well as legally binding commitments in cyberspace. There is a pressing need to identify and develop rules for responsible state behavior to increase stability and security in the global ICT environment. Please be assured of Malaysia's continued and constructive engagement in this regard. Terima kasih, Bapak.
Terima kasih, Bapak Duta Besar. Thank you so much, Pak Dato' Syed. And now, in the next in my list is the Republic of Korea, Ambassador Park.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me begin by expressing my appreciation to Indonesia and other co-hosts of today's meeting. I would also like to thank the briefers for their comprehensive presentations. Mr. President, as clearly stated in paragraph 5 of 2015 Group of Governmental Expert Report, cyber attacks targeted against the critical infrastructure of a state should be viewed as the most harmful attacks. This is due to the fact that such attacks can paralyze public infrastructure, such as power grid and traffic networks, and resulting in significant damages not only for individuals, but also at the national level. In particular, the Republic of Korea is deeply concerned about cyber attacks against health and medical facilities and vaccine researching institute, as well as cybercrimes such as the seizure of assets and funds related to the COVID-19 pandemic response. In order to protect critical infrastructure, it is necessary for each state to maintain its relevant domestic laws and regulations and establish a response system, including the identification and managing of critical infrastructure at the government level. My government enacted the Act on the Protection of Information and Communication Infrastructure in 2001, and through these several divisions, has been strengthening its critical infrastructure protection system. Moreover, my government set up the Committee for Protecting Information and Communication Infrastructure, headed by the Minister of the Office for Governmental Policy Coordination, establishing a government-wide response system through the participation of 19 central government agencies and 7 private organizations. Through the Act of 2001, my government has designated over 400 facilities in the field of national security, administration, law and order, finance, broadcasting communication, transportation, and energy as critical information and communication infrastructure, and thoroughly supervise them, such as by undertaking annual vulnerability assessment and analysis. Meanwhile, my government is also elevating its strenuous effort in the capacity building of the relevant organizations, cybersecurity by hosting various training and workshops for cybersecurity personnel. However, considering the inherent transnational and undetectable nature of cyber threat, a country cannot successfully protect its critical infrastructure on its own. The combined effort of the international community is essential. In this regard, it is critical that the international community recognizes the importance of the norms on the protection of critical infrastructure as outlined in paragraph 13 of the 2015 GGE report, which was adopted through consensus, and faithfully implement those norms. In addition, we must continue our effort to establish competence building measures at the global, regional, and bilateral levels, and continue to help strengthen the capacity of others in protecting critical infrastructure. The ASEAN Regional Forum, for example, has adopted the protection of critical infrastructure as one of its 5 competence building measures, and is discussing ways to enhance cooperation in this area. As a country that has transformed itself It transformed its social and economic development based on its cutting-edge information and communication technology, and has overcome various cyber threats in the process. Republic of Korea will continue to share its experience and policy with other member states and continue its capacity building assistance. In closing, Mr. President, I sincerely hope that today's discussion will help to further enhance critical infrastructure protection, which in turn will promote not only domestic stability and welfare, but international peace and security as well. I thank you, Mr. President, for your attention.
Kamsahamnida, Park. Now I would like to give the floor to Mexico. Mr. Isaac Morales, Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mexico thanks Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the ICRC for convening this Arria Formula meeting on cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. My delegation attaches great importance to issues related to the preservation of cyberspace for peaceful purposes and to maintain its full potential as a catalyzer for sustainable development. As we have witnessed in the last months by the situation brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, our dependency on the internet, digital platforms, and in general on cyberspace has been amplified. Unfortunately, this has also brought an increase in cyber attacks in number and magnitude, and even criminal and hostile acts on critical infrastructure that serves to provide life-essential services. Therefore, it is high time that multilateral cooperation, and particularly the United Nations, has a more proactive role in the prevention of these attacks and the protection of critical infrastructure. My country confirms its confidence on the multilateralism and actively participates in the major processes dedicated to the cyberspace and international security, governance, and digital technologies. By reaffirming that peace and peaceful settlement of disputes, international law, fundamental freedoms and rights, as well as sustainable development opportunities, are mutually reinforcing. We all member states are called to be constructively involved in these discussions. Mr. President, for Mexico, it is very clear that critical infrastructure is and should be safeguarded as off limits from cyber operations, be it attacks or any other malicious activity that would damage or undermine its functioning. The General Assembly has already adopted by consensus a series of 11 voluntary norms on responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Among those norms, we can find unequivocal guidelines on the importance of protecting critical infrastructure and on not conducting or supporting activities that would damage critical infrastructure. In this regard, my country strongly believes in urgent implementation by all states of those voluntary norms, as well as firmly abiding by them and by strengthening confidence building measures in cyberspace and capacity building efforts to further contribute to close digital divides. The success of their implementation will be greater when they are better known and better understood by the international community at large, including governments, private sector, and other civil society actors. But such implementation cannot be made in isolation. We do need to call upon those norms clearly linked to the applicability of existing international law. Mr. President, as Mexico has already stated in the past, in order to prevent cyber affairs from escalating to a point where the Security Council could be involved, we must be committed to promote an open, reliable stable, and secure cyber environment. The best preventive effort we can undertake is ensuring that cyberspace does not become a hostile domain. My country reiterates its call on all member states to invest in prevention and to anchor all activities in cyberspace to the full respect of international law, the implementation of agreed multilateral norms, international cooperation, confidence-building measures, and the centrality of capacity building, where efforts developed by regional organizations and other relevant stakeholders can be complementary. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias. Next on my list, Romania. Mr. Mihai Cocoru, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the floor, in this case, the mic, in our very timely and important meeting. I would like to also thank the organizers of this event, the rest of the organizers, as well as our briefers for their highly valuable insights. Please note our full agreement with the EU statement as it was delivered earlier. Mr. President, in line with your guiding questions, I can note that whenever we are discussing cyber operations against key infrastructures, which provide essential services to the population or allow the exercising of an essential function of a state, there seems to be one common significant denominator. Operations aiming to exfiltrate strategic information of technological, industrial, or military relevance, attacks against banking and financial sectors manifesting APT characteristics, attacks against public utilities, hospitals, or medical research facilities, which are particularly appalling today, or even influence operations instrumented to the use of ICTs, are new only in their technological manifestations. They are not unique by nature. They are neither new nor unique in the intentions and operational objectives which determine them. Most of the time, if not always, such operations are connected to the action or the lack of action of states. In the multi-stakeholder environment that is the cyberspace, states represent both the most important origin of threat and at the same time, states hold, through their action, the key to global cybersecurity. As a result, the only feasible way for securing cyberspace, including our critical infrastructures, is to focus on advancing responsible state behavior in all preventive and normative mechanisms at the global, regional, and national levels. We understand the negative limits of this behavior. They revolve around not breaking international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. We also understand that responsible state behavior also involves key positive obligations of having, for example, in place modern and effective national legislation, cyber strategies and institutions, of promoting and participating in substantial international cooperation, and very importantly, of transparency, upholding agreed norms, promoting democratic principles, and most importantly, fully respecting human dignity. Overall, at the very minimum, responsible state behavior is translatable into the old principle of not doing unto another what you would not have done to yourself, by actively respecting the rational principles and obligations which have resulted in our legal order. Once this is achieved, cooperation is key, and we have a wide range of examples of responsible states working together through interinstitutional cooperation, effective time-sensitive information exchange between competent authorities, including law enforcement agencies, as well as the private sector, industry, and academia. For example, in addition to Romania's activity within the EU, including that which revolved around the adoption and implementation of the NIS directive, we have promoted the CBD policy and its correspondent CBM in the GFCE and OSCE frameworks. The OSCE CBM 15, actively promoted by Romania, highlights the importance of voluntary arrangements on classification of ICT incidents and of exchange of information for the effectiveness of national action in protecting critical infrastructure. Although we have a wide range of such examples of collaboration, as the cyber dimension gains more importance along with other operational domains, a key requirement for protecting our critical infrastructure is for the cyber component to be treated as such. We need to work together, Mr. President, by virtue of our responsible behavior. We need to work to hold states accountable when acting against certain principles. Our actions must be transparent and consistent with the full applicability of international law. And I agree here with Belgium that what we do not tolerate in the physical world, we should not tolerate in the virtual one. This is why Romania welcomes this event as a step forward in the continuity of engagement within the Security Council on cyber issues, which indeed deserves our permanent attention. Thank you.
Mulțumesc mult. Thank you so much. Romania. Next on my list is Qatar. Qatar, Mr. Talal.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like at the outset to express our appreciation to the organizers of this important meeting and thank the briefers for their valuable contribution. The fast developments in information and communication technologies open increasing multiple breaches through which indispensable infrastructures can be disrupted. Such critical importance of the infrastructure makes it a prime target for terrorist and criminal attacks aimed at inflicting the greatest damage possible. In view of this large-scale dependence on vital infrastructures, disrupting or damaging them could cause multiple and complex repercussions affecting many sectors and scopes of life, and threaten people's lives, health, and well-being, as well as regional and international peace and stability. This issue deserves, therefore, due attention by member states and the United Nations. With the widespread use of digital technology, no country is immune to the threat of cyberspace abuse. For my country, the state of Qatar, the interest in cyber attacks does not only stem from the prevention of their possible occurrences, for we have already witnessed what those attacks on sensitive digital services are capable of. In fact, on the 23rd of May 2017, the state of Qatar was a victim of a state-sponsored cyber attack crime that targeted Qatar News Agency to spread false information with a view to using it as a pretext to impose unjust, illegal, and unjustified blockade and unilateral measures against the state of Qatar. After more than 3 years, those measures are still a factor that undermines stability in our region and have adverse effects on the basic rights and freedoms of thousands of people. Mr. President, achieving the goal of protecting infrastructure from cyber attacks requires technological aspects that involve assessing existing and potential threats, and the need to keep pace with the rapid technological developments and emerging breaches that could be exploited. Such endeavor requires regional and national strategies that are in line with the principles of international cooperation and sharing experiences and best practices. The state of Qatar attaches importance to addressing the technical aspects as it takes vigorous measures to harness the latest technologies at various levels to maintain information security and infrastructure security. With the experiences and capabilities it has gained, the state of Qatar contributes to strengthening international cooperation and capacity building in areas such as preventing terrorist attacks on soft targets and sports facilities, in partnership with the relevant international and United Nations bodies, such as the United Nations Office for Counterterrorism. In addition to the technical aspects, countering cyber attacks requires assigning due importance to the applicability of international law to the use of information and communication technologies by states. Responsible state behavior in cyberspace in the context of international security needs to be advanced. In this regard, the state of Qatar has highlighted the importance of seeking to adopt a binding international instrument to maintain information security, along with standards, rules, and principles for responsible behavior in the use of information and communication technologies, in order to reduce risks to international peace, security, and stability in the future. And I thank you, Mr. President.
Shukran, Talal. Last on my list is Ethiopia, Sete Tilahun. Sete.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, my delegation wishes to congratulate Indonesia for a successful presidency of the Security Council for the month of August. We would also like to thank Indonesia, Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, and the International Committee of the Red Cross for organizing this timely meeting. We thank all the briefers for their insightful contributions. Mr. President, information and communication technologies are now an integral part of our daily lives. The COVID-19 pandemic has accentuated our heavy reliance on ICT for key social and economic activities, including but not limited to connect with loved ones, to conduct banking transactions, to trade within and across borders, and to undertake diplomatic engagements. Indeed, ICT saved humanity in the face of unprecedented viral outbreaks that put the world at standstill. From business continuity for both public and private sectors to education and health sectors, it is difficult to imagine a world without digital technologies. But unfortunately, this space has been weaponized by states and non-state actors for malicious intents. The growing digitization of our lives and critical infrastructure underscores the urgency of this threat. The targeting of various ICT systems through cyberspace attacks undermines international peace and security and poses significant risk to our critical infrastructure, particularly in developing countries where the capacity to counter malicious cyber operations is either weak or inexistent. Mr. President, we believe no country, big or small, can tackle cyber threat alone, as criminals are not bound by national borders. That is why meetings like this one are important to raise awareness, not only about vulnerability of critical infrastructure against cyber attacks, but also about the detrimental impact of ever-evolving cyber threats. The cybersecurity threats can cause death and injuries to individuals and members of societies. In recent years, we have seen growing attacks against health care, transport, electrical, and financial institutions that run on ICT infrastructures. In Ethiopia, during the last 1 year, our agencies thwarted more than 700 dangerous cyber attacks attempted using malware, infrastructure scams, cyber infrastructure disruption, hacking, and cyber fraud. The upward trend in the cyber-based crime is a source of serious national concern. And the vast majority of the attempted cyber attacks occurred due to lack of proper technical knowledge and user awareness. Key infrastructure facilities are continuously targeted, including efforts to disrupt communication and banking services. We know firsthand that challenges are manifold. On the other hand, our legislation and policies cannot keep up with fast evolving threats and disruptions. On the other hand, some of these disruptive tools and their multinational owners are not governed by local laws. That is why we need to forge cooperation and meaningful partnership across sector and national borders in order to formulate global, regional, and national policy response to cyber threats and growing misuse of ICT. In this context, we join others in calling for mutual cooperation among all states to ensure greater security and stability in the cyberspace. Developing countries need capacity building assistance and technology transfer to strengthen safeguards against malicious uses of cyberspace. Partnership on the prevention and mitigation of cyber attacks remains important. Mr. President, in conclusion, I wish to reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to the voluntary norms, rules, or principles of responsible behavior of states, which provides for the unimpaired use and operation of critical infrastructure for public service and the responsibility of states to protect critical infrastructure from cyber threats. I thank you. Terima kasih, Baba.
Amesegi that is thank you very much in Ethiopian. I think as the last speaker, Eshete, brings the message that colleagues have provided us all, namely not trying to sum up, but I think the points that colleagues have been raising is that the need for us all to work together to cooperate in addressing this very important issue, and also the need to have exploring and sharing of best practices because each and every one of us has experience and that can be shared with each other. I shall not try to sum up, but simply your statement, your points have been very well noted, everyone, as this has been. And of course, we would appreciate if there are any written statement that could be provided to us so that we can follow through with other discussion on these very important issues. I'm quite happy that we are able to have a very extensive and comprehensive discussion. And once again, I would like to thank all the participants, all the ambassadors, the co-hosts, as well as ICRC and the briefer. I think we made a good start for today, and I do hope that we could continue on these very important issues. Once again, thank you very much. Shukran, kamsahamnida, terima kasih, and of course, ame segi na lehu, as well as all the others. Thank you that I do not understand anymore. Thank you very much,
Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you very much. Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much.
Domo arigatou gozaimasu. And have a nice remaining evening.
Same to you, Mr. President. Same to you.